in the realm of eternal twilight. Forestia, an otherworldly planet steeped in magic, shimmered beneath the twin silver moons that never left its sky. Under their eternal twilight, ancient forests teemed with glowing flora, nourished by ley lines pulsing with raw mana. Rivers of radiant blue coursed through the land like lifeblood, sustaining not only the world itself, but the elves who ruled it. At its heart stood Greenwood, the grand capital of the Elven Empire. A living city, it grew from the trees themselves and was fortified with the mystical silverstone mine from beneath sacred groves. Greenwood spires pierced the heavens, glowing gently in the moonlight. Within the soaring halls of the lunar palace resided the goddess of this world, Luna, divine mother of the elven race. Luna, goddess of the moon, far above the mortal forests, within the astral sanctum known as the moonlit sanctuary, Luna watched over her creation. Her silver hair spilled like liquid light, and her violet eyes bore the weight of countless ages. Time held no sway over her. She had shaped the elves in her likeness, gifting them with intellect, elegance, and the boundless ability to harness mana. Yet for all her power, she remained bound to Forestia, her divine essence anchored to the world itself. Though she could peer through the cosmos and open celestial gateways, she could never cross them. To enact her will on distant worlds, she required emissaries, devotees to serve her cause. Foremost among them were the royal elves, the pinnacle of her divine craft. The pillars of the elven hierarchy. The elven empire thrived through strict order and hierarchy, status defined by blood, magic, and beauty. 1. Royal elves, children of the goddess ***. With silver hair like their divine matron, royal elves possessed all-encompassing magical abilities and lived for over 5,000 years. Masters of every arcane discipline, especially the sacred lunar magic, they were few in number and absolute in authority. Chief among them was Queen Alara Yvonne Forestia, supreme ruler of the empire. 2. High elves, the empire's noble heart ***. Radiant and golden-haired, high elves wielded powerful magic with precision, ruling provinces and commanding armies. Though barred from lunar magic, their knowledge and strength made them the backbone of elven society. They could live for 2,500 years and often rivaled royals in light and elemental magic. 3. Common elves, the people of Forestia ***. Numbering in the hundreds of millions, common elves displayed magical affinity through the color of their hair. *Red, flame magic. *Blue, water magic. *Green, earth magic. *Blonde, light magic. *Silver, rare lunar magic. Chosen as priestesses. Bound by their lineage, common elves lived for 1,000 years but were excluded from high office. They served as the workforce, warriors, and scholars of the empire. The moonlit sovereign Queen Alara. From her throne of silverwood, Queen Alara ruled with grace and unmatched power. Her appearance echoed Luna herself, silver-haired, violet-eyed, and near-divine in magical prowess. For 3,000 years, she had maintained the empire's prosperity, but a silent decay was spreading. The royal and high elves had grown infertile, their numbers declining with each passing age. While the common elves thrived, the ruling elite faced extinction. Alara, ever vigilant, had searched for a solution, and Luna gave her one. The world beyond Earth. Through the astral pool in the palace's sanctum, Alara beheld another realm. A world bursting with life. A planet called Earth. Its inhabitants, humans, lacked magic but compensated with science, strength, and numbers. They were fertile, resourceful, and technologically advanced. More than that, they were conquerors, not so different from the elves. Earth was a lifeline. Alara smiled. This world would sustain her people. The invasion begins. Opening a portal to Earth required monumental energy and offered only brief access. Every second counted. Standing before the High Elven Council and the generals, Alara's decree was swift and absolute. Earth shall be our salvation. We will take what we must. But the first wave could not risk high-ranking losses. They needed a leader who was expendable, but ambitious enough to lead. Diog von Forestia, the 56th prince, an obscure royal with little power but burning aspirations, was selected to spearhead the invasion. He was not expected to return. As the queen turned her gaze skyward, stars reflected in her unblinking eyes, she whispered, "Prepare the portal. Let the invasion begin." Crisis of Forestia. The moon cast a pale light over Greenwood, the undying capital of the Elven Empire. Queen Alara von Forestia, cloaked in flowing silver robes, stood atop the highest balcony of the imperial palace, her gaze fixed upon the towering statue of Goddess Luna in the city's heart. The empire, grand and ancient, stood on the edge of ruin. Birth rates among royal and high elves had dwindled for centuries. Immortality had become a curse. While the common elves still numbered in the hundreds of millions, their caste prevented them from holding power. The nobility, the high elves, had diminished to mere millions, and the royal elves, direct descendants of Luna, had fallen to mere tens of thousands. Alara's fists clenched. New blood, new land, new vitality. That was what the Empire needed. And through Luna's divine vision, they had found it. Earth, a world of fleeting, magicless creatures. A world ripe for conquest. The High Elven Council had debated plans for years, but Alara's mind was already made. They would invade. A burden of birthright. Within the radiant halls of the Lunar Palace, Prince Diog von Forestia knelt before Queen Alara. Silver spires framed the twilight sky, and moonlight danced across crystalline walls. The queen's piercing violet eyes fixed upon him. Around them, the royal and high elves looked on with veiled disdain. Dia was used to this. A male, a prince in title only, 56th in line, 387th in succession. Despite his noble blood and silver hair, he was a relic in a matriarchal empire. Whispers had followed him all his life. A prince? Waste of blood. Had he been born a princess, he might have mattered. Males fight and breed. Nothing more. Ignored by the matrons, overshadowed by his sisters, Diog had fought for every ounce of recognition. He had mastered blade, spell, and strategy, far beyond what was expected of him. Then he met Mary, a forbidden love. She was a common elf, a sun knight, golden-haired and fierce, unafraid of anyone. Diog first saw her at a training ground in the High Elven Citadel. While nobles practiced magic, common elves were forged into warriors. Mary stood apart, unyielding, fearless. She hadn't bowed when they met. A prince? Prove it, she said. She challenged him. He won. Barely. She saw him. Not his rank, not his burden, asterisk, asterisk him, asterisk, asterisk. But such love was forbidden. Royals did not wed commoners. Only Luna's chosen priestesses could marry into the royal line. There was one path left, become a hero. Now, fate offered that path. The queen's command. Prince Diog, the queen's voice echoed. Diog raised his head. A portal has opened. Gasps rippled through the court. Beyond it lies a world brimming with primitive life. Magicless, fertile, and unguarded. Earth. The chamber fell silent. A reconnaissance fleet will cross over. One ship, empowered by Luna, will lead the first wave. Diog's breath caught. You shall command this mission. Shock rippled among the nobles. Then came the blow. You are expendable. The word struck like iron. Succeed and return in glory. Fail, and your loss will mean nothing. Diog bowed, hiding his fury. This was his only chance. For Mary, for honor. He accepted. Arrival over Earth. A roaring surge tore through space as the elven vessel emerged from the rift, cloaked in divine illusion, floating over Earth's oceans. Diog stood at the helm. So this is Earth. Oceans stretched endlessly. Distant continents teemed with life. No mana, yet so alive. He believed they were hidden. He was wrong. Eyes in the sky. High above, human satellites detected a shadow, an anomaly that blocked the stars. Military command centers lit up worldwide. Unknown object, South China Sea. No radar return. No heat. But it's visible. 12 jets were launched. Asterisk 6F, 22 Raptors, USA. Asterisk 6J, 20 Mighty Dragons, China. The battle begins. Barrier. Now, Diag roared. Too late. Missiles streaked through the sky. Explosions rocked the ship. The hull shuddered. The barrier failed. I won't lose to primitives. Lower the shield. Counterattack. Elven Sky warriors launched, hurling lightning spears, weaving windshields. One struck down a jet, but the humans adapted fast. Missiles tore through squads. Machine guns outpaced magic. AJ-20 maneuvered behind a formation, then annihilated it with a missile blast. Diag snarled. How can they fight us like this? The trap below. Beneath the waves, INS Arahant, India's nuclear sub, lay in wait. Then, 2 torpedoes launched. The first shattered the lunar barrier. The second tore through the ship's core. Flames erupted. The elven ship plummeted, crashing into the sea. Diag, barely alive, sank beneath the waves. Pain consumed him. He should have died. But Luna's divine magic clung to him. As his vision faded, a shadow approached, the INS Arahant. He was the only survivor. Back in Greenwood, the news reached Queen Alara. She sat frozen. Her son dead. A single tear fell. Then her golden eyes hardened. She rose. Prepare the full invasion force. Before the statue of Luna, she bowed. Mother of all elves, I swear I will avenge him. I will burn Earth to ashes. And thus, the war truly began.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Greenwood, capital of the Elven Empire. The grand palace of Queen Alara stood in the heart of Greenwood, an ethereal city of silver spires, an enchanted forest that shimmered under the eternal glow of the twin moons. A place of divine beauty, where the whispers of magic flowed through the air like a living force. But on this day, the halls of the palace carried an air of grief and vengeance. Alara sat upon her throne, draped in flowing robes of midnight silver, her long, radiant hair cascading like the moonlit rivers of Forestia. Before her, the royal council knelt in silence, awaiting her decree. The news had already spread across the empire. Prince Diag von Forestia, 387th in line to the throne, had perished on the battlefield of a distant, primitive world. The single tear that trailed down her flawless cheek before vanishing into the aura of lunar magic that surrounded her was a trace of her motherly love. It was a brief moment of mourning, but nothing more. She was not just a mother. She was the queen of the Elven Empire, and weakness was unbecoming of her. Her silver eyes burned with cold determination. They have taken my son from me. Her voice echoed across the chamber, resonating with a force that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened warriors. For this, Earth shall drown in fire and magic. Their world shall know the wrath of Forestia. The assembled elves lowered their heads in solemn agreement. The first fleet is already being assembled, my queen, spoke High General Valeria, a royal elf with piercing violet eyes and a commanding presence. The portal magic is unstable, but our scholars blessed with Goddess Luna's divine wisdom have determined a more suitable opening point, Antarctica, on the southern edge of their world. It will allow for a full-scale invasion. Alara nodded approvingly. We will not repeat Diag's mistake. This time, we strike with the full might of the Empire. But before she could continue, a voice called out from the entrance of the chamber. A figure clad in golden armor strode forward. Kneeling before the queen was Mary, the Sun Knight, a warrior of radiant presence, her blonde hair tied into a firm braid, her golden eyes burning with conviction. Your Majesty, Mary said, her voice steady but filled with desperation. I beg you, allow me to take part in the coming war. Gasps filled the chamber. A mere commoner, a Sun Knight, had spoken so boldly before the queen herself. Her noble master, a high elf lady draped in the white robes of nobility, immediately stepped forward in outrage. Mary, you overstep your station. Apologize to Her Majesty at once. But Alara raised a hand, silencing the room. She gazed at Mary with piercing interest. And why do you wish to fight in this war, child? Mary clenched her fists, her heart pounding in her chest. Because I love Diug. Silence. A heavy silence that suffocated the chamber. Even the air itself seemed still. Alara's expression did not change, but her silver eyes glowed faintly with understanding. He loved you too, the queen finally said. Mary's breath hitched, but she quickly regained herself. Then allow me to avenge him. The nobles murmured among themselves. A royal elf had loved a commoner? Unthinkable. Yet, before any could object, Alara rose from her throne, her presence alone enough to command silence. Very well, she declared. You shall lead a new order of warriors, the royal knights, composed of commoner elves, sun knights, and lunar priestesses. You will serve directly under me in this war. You will fight in Diug's name. Mary's eyes widened, disbelief and gratitude warring within her. She bowed deeply, her heart pounding. I will not fail you, Your Majesty. The gathering of the fleet. In the coming days, the great cities of the Elven Empire burned with preparations for war. Across the forests of Forestia, the first fleet of the Empire was assembled, an armada of enchanted ships, each one a floating fortress of divine magic. The flagship, Linaris, was the pride of the fleet, a grand vessel of moon-forged steel, commanded by none other than Grand Admiral Silwyn, a royal elf with centuries of naval warfare experience. Beside her stood General Valeria, leading the Imperial legions. Thousands of high elves and commoner elves trained in the arts of war, their weapons and armor blessed by the lunar priestesses. Mary, now clad in royal issue armor, led her newly formed royal knights, commoner elves who had sworn their loyalty to her and the queen. The portal mages, granted authority to the portal by the goddess Luna herself, worked tirelessly, weaving the magic necessary to open a new gateway to Earth. The ritual would take time, but soon the path to vengeance would be opened once more. The portal opens. Days turn to weeks, and finally, the time arrived. At the heart of the royal palace, beneath the towering spires of Greenwood, the sacred portal chamber shuddered as ancient runes blazed to life. The air crackled with power as the space between worlds was torn asunder. A great, swirling vortex of shimmering silver erupted into existence. A portal to Earth, this time opening not over the warm waters of the South China Sea, but in the frozen wastelands of Antarctica, near the southern tip of South America. A frigid wind howled through the portal, carrying with it the distant echoes of a foreign world. Alara stood before the great gateway, her silver hair flowing like liquid moonlight. She raised a hand, and the assembled armies knelt before her. Go forth, she commanded. Let Earth know the fury of the Elven Empire. With that, the first fleet surged forward, vanishing into the portal one by one. Mary stepped through last, gripping her sword tightly, her heart burning with purpose. For Diug, for vengeance. This time, Earth would not stand a chance. Mary Von Solaris, the royal knight of vengeance. The cold was suffocating. Even through my enchanted armor, I felt it creeping into my bones. Antarctica, the land of ice and death. Behind me, the royal knights, my warriors, moved in perfect synchronization. Before us, the first of many human research stations, a pitiful construct of metal and glass, stood defiantly against the elements. It would not stand against us. The portal had deposited us at the southernmost tip of this frozen continent. The high elf generals in command had ordered a swift eradication of the humans present. The lunar priestesses had woven a vast veil of magic, severing this land from the rest of Earth's networks. No communications in, no cries for help out. We take this land for Queen Alara, for the Elven Empire, I declared, raising my golden sword, the divine flames of Solaris dancing along its edge. The royal knights roared in response. Tonight, the conquest would begin. The defenders' last stand. Inside the research base, Dr. Alan Carter pressed a trembling hand to the radio. Static. No, 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 no. He turned to Commander Reynolds, the head of security. The man, a hardened veteran, clenched his jaw. "We're cut off," Reynolds growled. "This doesn't make sense. Who could jam satellite signals this deep in Antarctica? Are we facing aliens?" One of the technicians panicked. "I heard a rumor of elves appearing near China. Maybe it is them." "What nonsense! You are an educated scientist. Don't fall to the Chinese propaganda." The answer came in the form of a distant explosion. The outer watchtower erupted into flames. Screams echoed in the frozen air. "They're here." Reynolds grabbed his rifle. "Destroy everything. We can't let them take our research." The scientists hesitated. "Now!" With shaking hands, they began smashing hard drives, lighting papers on fire, and setting controlled explosions in the most sensitive areas. But it was too late. The Royal Knights had arrived. Mary's assault, the crushing of resistance. We descended like shadows, cutting through the metal gates with sunfire magic. The human guards fired their primitive metal weapons, but their bullets shattered against our enchanted armor. "Weak," one of my knights muttered, slashing a soldier down. I lunged forward, bringing my blade in a clean arc. A scientist tried to flee, his face twisted in terror. I hesitated for only a moment before driving my sword through his back. I would show no mercy, not after what they had done to Diog. I clenched my teeth, memories flashing in my mind. Memories of Diog, a love against fate. "Mary, you," I had laughed, tossing a snowball at Diog's face. "You mock me, Mary," he had grumbled, wiping the frost from his silver hair. "A royal elf, marrying a mere sun knight? Impossible." "Nothing is impossible," he had said, his lunar eyes burning with determination. "Then prove it," I had whispered, testing him. And he had. Diog had commanded his own expedition, proving his worth as a leader despite the Empire's disdain for males. He had fought not just for glory, but for us. Now he was gone, and I would make Earth pay. The final defenders, humanity's resolve. "Commander, they're breaking through." Reynolds gritted his teeth. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and surrounded. He turned to his men, 5 soldiers left. Scientists were either dead or captured. "Hold them off as long as you can," he ordered. "We won't survive. We don't need to. Just delay long enough to at least create a chance for even one human to bring the news back." The men saluted. Then, with defiant roars, they charged. "Let's show these bastards some real metal." Mary's wrath, the end of the base. I watched as the last of them fell to my knight's blades. A single human soldier, gasping for breath, looked up at me. Blood trickled from his lips. "You monsters will stop you. The reinforcement will come soon." "Oh, you mean your kinds that have escaped? Don't worry, they will follow you soon." His eyes were filled with despair with my revelation, and then he tried to shoot me with his meta-eye weapon they called gun. "You monster, I'll kill you." But before he could do so, I plunged my sword into his heart. "No, you won't." With their deaths, the base belonged to us. The High Elves arrived, surveying our work. One of them, Lady Valus, nodded approvingly. "The Queen was right to form the Royal Knights," she admitted. Recognition. I met her gaze without fear. Let them acknowledge our strength. Let them know that Diog's sacrifice was not in vain. I turned toward the horizon, where more human outposts awaited. Burn them all. Escape across the ice. The young scientist's lungs burned as he pushed his ski bike to its limits, racing across the frozen wasteland. Behind him, glowing projectiles crashed into the ice, sending up plumes of frozen mist. "I can't stop. I can't stop. I can't." A golden-haired high elf commander raised her hand. "Enough. He's finished." Mary, watching from the side, scoffed. "He's just delaying the inevitable. Let him freeze." The elves halted their pursuit, turning back toward their base, confident that the frozen wasteland would claim him. But the scientist refused to give up. His hands trembled as he reached the edge of the continent, staring at the black, frigid ocean beneath him. No way out. He took a breath and jumped. The freezing abyss swallowed him whole. His body screamed in agony as icy water tore away all warmth. "This is it." Then, in the darkness, something moved. A massive black and white figure surfaced, a passing orca. The creature, sensing his fading life, nudged him upwards, guiding him toward a distant shape cutting through the ice. A U.S. Navy resupply ship. The ship's crew spotted something in the water. Man overboard. Get him up now. They pulled the half-dead scientist onto the deck. His lips were blue, his body shaking violently. He clutched at the officer's jacket, barely whispering. Turn back. Then his world faded to black. A silent prisoner. Thousands of miles away, in a classified Indian military base deep within the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, a single containment chamber stood in a heavily guarded underground facility. Inside, floating in a suspension tank, was Diug von Forestia. The medical monitors displayed stable vitals. His body, though comatose, was alive. A scientist glanced at the readings, shaking his head. Even after all this time, his body shows no signs of decay. It's as if something is preserving him. Another researcher muttered, "This silver energy isn't the magic from those fairy tales. If only we could understand it." Behind the glass, Diug remained motionless. His silver hair drifted weightlessly in the liquid, his eyes still closed, his fate uncertain. Outside, the world prepared for war, and the last surviving elf of the first invasion remained trapped in an eternal silence. The vast southern ocean stretched endlessly, its steel-gray waves rolling beneath a sky that threatened a storm. The USS Grissom, a U.S. Navy resupply ship, cut through the cold waters on its scheduled mission to deliver vital supplies to Antarctic research bases. The crew had expected the usual challenges: unpredictable weather, treacherous icebergs, and the sheer isolation of the continent. What they had not expected was the barely alive scientist they had just rescued from the icy depths. A survivor's grim message. Lieutenant James Holden stood near the medical bay, his fingers clenched into a fist. The young scientist, no older than 25, had been found barely alive, his body nearly frozen solid. The doctors had worked tirelessly to stabilize him, but he remained comatose. Whatever he had been through had nearly killed him, and his battered body told a silent story of horror. Captain Douglas Reeves paced near Holden, his hardened features grim. "You're sure he was alone?" Holden nodded. No sign of anyone else. The man was drenched, unconscious, and clutching a broken comm device. If it weren't for that damn orca that pushed him toward us, we wouldn't have found him. The two men turned as Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's lead physician, stepped out of the med bay. "He's stable," she said. "Barely." But before he blacked out, he muttered something. Just one thing. Reeves' brow furrowed. "What was it?" Vasquez took a deep breath, her face pale. "Turn back. Antarctica is lost." A heavy silence fell between them. The dilemma at sea. The officers gathered in the bridge, the situation weighing heavily on them. Antarctica was supposed to be uninhabited except for scientific teams. What could this man have seen to make him say something like that? "We have two choices," Commander Alex Carter said, his voice firm. "We press on and complete our mission, or we turn back and leave the other research teams without supplies." Holden countered, "We don't even know what happened. What if it was just some accident? An accident that left him nearly frozen to death and whispering about Antarctica being lost." Vasquez shot back. Reeves exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "There's something wrong here, but we can't just abandon our duty. If we leave everyone down there to their fate." Silence. Then a voice crackled over the radio. "Unidentified vessel. This is the Pacific Star. Do you copy?" Holden immediately responded. "This is the USS Grissom. Identify yourself." "This is Captain Mark Reynolds of the cruise ship Pacific Star. We've been informed of unusual activity around Antarctica. Do you have any updates? Is there a storm incoming?" Reeves exchanged glances with his crew. The Pacific Star was a luxury cruise liner, carrying civilians on an expedition. If something terrible was happening in Antarctica, they couldn't risk innocent lives. "This is Captain Reeves of the Grissom," he said. "We've recovered a survivor who strongly advises turning back. We recommend you alter course immediately. I don't know what's happening there, but shouldn't be something civilians to get involved in." A pause. Then Reynolds responded. Understood. We can take the survivor and any crew you wish to send back. Reeves nodded. Prepare for transfer, a choice that seals their fate. The exchange was swift but somber. The injured scientist, along with a handful of crew members, was transferred to the Pacific Star. As the cruise ship veered away, disappearing into the mist, the USS Grissom pressed forward toward Antarctica. Holden stared at the receding ship, a knot in his stomach, still thinking whether he made the right choice or not. "Think we just sent them to safety?" he asked. Reeves didn't answer. Hours later, the Grissom neared the Antarctic coast. The research bases were in sight, except something was wrong. The structures were lifeless, dark, and partially destroyed. No radio signals, Carter reported. No signs of life. The ship's radar suddenly spiked. "Unknown contacts," a crewman shouted. Dozens of them, closing in fast. The first explosion rocked the ship before they could react. From the blinding white snow, figures emerged, moving with inhuman grace. Elves. Mary's perspective, the Royal Knight's strike. Mary watched the Grissom from a distant ice ridge, her golden armor reflecting the pale sunlight. She felt nothing as the attack commenced. "This is war," she told herself. "There's no place for mercy. Close the distance and destroy them, and ensure no words get back to those outside." At her command, the Royal Knight struck first. Lunar priestesses raised their hands, casting void magic, severing all communications from the ship. The humans were alone. The ship's anti-air defenses roared to life, firing at the flying elven warriors, but the High Elves countered with light magic, intercepting the projectiles midair. The humans were organized, trying to fight back, but they were hopelessly outmatched. "They're strong-willed," one of her knights commented. "Strength of will means nothing against overwhelming power. All strategies become meaningless when faced with pure power," Mary responded coldly. The desperate last stand. On the Grissom, Holden gritted his teeth as he fired his rifle. The elves moved too fast, their swords and magic cutting through soldiers like paper. Blood stained the deck as the crew fought bravely, but it was a losing battle. "Detonate the ship," Reeves ordered. "We can't let them take anything. Set fire to the ammo depot. Throw a damn grenade if you have TO." Carter ran toward the control panel, only for a blinding arc of golden light to slice through him, leaving nothing but charred remains. Holden turned and fired at the attacker, Mary. She blocked his bullets with a flick of her sword. He didn't even have time to scream before she ran him through. The battle was over. Mary stood over the fallen humans, her sword dripping with blood. The ship had been claimed. "We have more than enough information from those captured. The Empire doesn't require the tricks of the magicless. Burn it," she commanded. Lunar priestesses gathered, raising their hands. The ship erupted into blue flames, consumed by divine magic. A silent victory and a hidden awakening. The Grissom was gone. Mary stared into the flames, but she felt no satisfaction. "Diug," she thought. "I hope you're watching." Far away, in a secret underground base in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, an elf lay in a coma. For weeks, he had been unmoving, untouched by the world. But as the Grissom sank into the abyss, his finger twitched ever so slightly. Pacific Star, the first warning. Captain Mark Reynolds stood on the bridge of the Pacific Star, a cruise liner returning to Ushuaia, Argentina, after an Antarctic expedition. The ship's passengers, a mix of scientists wanting to research the mystery of the 8th continent, adventurers who want to unravel the secret of the frozen land, and wealthy tourists who have traveled everywhere in the world and want to visit the vast island of ice, were in high spirits, blissfully unaware of what was happening to the frozen continent behind them. Yet something felt wrong. Reynolds sipped his coffee as he listened to the radio officer report the latest transmissions, or the lack thereof. "Sir, still nothing." No response from McMurdo, Amundsen Scott, or any of the other stations. Reynolds frowned. Nothing at all? Not even automated signals. Dead silence. A cold dread settled in his chest. He had been sailing these waters for years, and while storms and technical failures could disrupt communication, total silence from all Antarctic bases was unprecedented. Then, something even stranger happened. "Captain," a lookout called. "We've got a small vessel approaching, naval markings. Looks like a U.S. supply ship." As the ship drew closer, distress signals blared from its speakers. The Pacific Star slowed, and a small team from the supply ship boarded, carrying an unconscious young man wrapped in blankets. His face was pale, lips blue, but he was alive. "He was found drifting in the water," one of the Navy crew explained. "Says he escaped from Antarctica. Said something about him turning back." Turning back. He says Antarctica is lost. "We have no idea what happened, but every research base is dark. There is a complete radio silence." Reynolds exchanged a look with his first officer. "We need to report this to the authorities immediately." Global realization. By the time Pacific Star docked in Ushuaia, intelligence agencies worldwide had intercepted the reports. Within hours, the news spread through classified military channels. The U.S. Navy, Royal Navy, Russian Northern Fleet, Plan, Indian Navy, and several others ordered their fleets toward Antarctica, forming a blockade along the Southern Ocean. Admiral Harper, commander of the U.S. Southern Command, stood before a panel of military and political leaders. "We have lost complete contact with Antarctica. No distress calls, no automated signals, nothing. The last message we received was from a resupply ship that never made it to its destination." The room was silent. "Do we have satellite images?" "We did, but all optical and infrared imaging over the region has been scrambled." "Scrambled?" the general asked. "Are we saying some kind of advanced electronic warfare is happening?" "We're saying," Harper replied grimly, "that whatever is down there, we have no eyes on it." The first adventurers. While governments prepared their response, others saw opportunity. From smugglers to mercenaries, from independent researchers to thrill seekers, a variety of clandestine ships began slipping past the blockade, driven by rumors of an abandoned Antarctica. Some sought fortune, abandoned supplies, valuable research data, even rumors of hidden military experiments. Others sought adventure, hoping to claim the glory of solving the mystery before world governments could act. Among them were the Black Sun Mercenaries, a private military group, well-armed and well-trained, looking for classified research facilities that might contain hidden technology. The Frostborn Expedition, a team of elite mountaineers and scientists determined to uncover what happened. The Crimson Tide Pirates, a band of smugglers hoping to loot whatever was left. Solomon Kane, a lone adventurer, ex-military, with a history of surviving impossible odds. As their ships slipped into the icy waters beyond the blockade, they had no idea what awaited them. Encounters in the frozen wasteland. The first group to land was the Crimson Tide Pirates. They set foot on an abandoned research base, looting food, fuel, and equipment. Their leader, a man named Vargas, laughed. "I told you. Nothing but an abandoned ice cube. Easy pickings." Then a scream. One of his men fell, a glowing spear impaled through his chest. Vargas turned, eyes widening as armored warriors, their shining, colorful hair flowing in the wind, stepped out from the shadows. "Intruders," one of the elves said coldly. "Kill them." Vargas barely had time to draw his gun before an arrow struck him between the eyes. None of his crew survived. Further inland, the Frostborn expedition made a different discovery. They found one of the old research facilities intact, its data servers still operational. "This is it," Dr. Sullivan, the lead scientist, whispered. "We can find out what happened." As he booted up the system, a security camera feed flickered to life. What they saw chilled their blood. Elven warriors standing over the bodies of human researchers. A woman in golden armor, looking like the leader of those elves, giving orders. And then the screen flickered, revealing a massive elven fortress built atop what was once McMurdo's station. This isn't possible. How can something so huge be built in such a short time, and that too in somewhere like Antarctica? One of the researchers whispered at the start, but ended up shouting at the end. Then the door behind them burst open. Elven warriors poured in, swords drawn. Solomon Kane was different. A seasoned survivor, he had come alone, sneaking past the blockade in a reinforced icebreaker. Unlike the others, He did not immediately seek fortune. He sought answers. He saw the remnants of battle. He saw tracks of creatures and warriors that did not belong to this world. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. An elven patrol, speaking a language he did not understand, moving through the snow. Cain had fought in wars. He had killed men, faced death countless times. But this was something else entirely. He took a deep breath, gripping his rifle. "I don't know what the hell you are," he muttered. "But at least you're not from here, and I will make sure to find some answers." The elves turned, sensing movement. The hunt had begun. The stage is set. As the world's militaries prepared for war, as survivors struggled to comprehend the impossible, and as lone adventurers faced an enemy unlike any before, Antarctica, once the last great frontier, had become a battlefield. The elves had claimed their foothold, but humanity had noticed. And soon, a reckoning would come. The Antarctic wind howled as Solomon Kane crouched low against the ice, his breath barely visible in the freezing air. His body was wrapped in a custom thermal suit, designed to keep him alive in the harsh conditions, but the cold still bit at his exposed skin. He had been on this mission for days now, evading elven patrols, using the shadows and blizzards to his advantage. But tonight was different. Tonight, he was going inside. McMurdo Station, what was once the largest human settlement on the continent, had become an elven fortress. Towering ice walls reinforced with magical barriers surrounded the complex, shimmering under the moonlight. The elves had repurposed the human buildings, but massive crystalline spires now jutted from the ice, giving the entire base an otherworldly feel. The banners of Queen Alara fluttered in the wind, their silver embroidery glowing faintly under the moon. Solomon adjusted his rifle and checked his sidearm. He was a veteran of many Black Ops missions, but nothing had prepared him for this. The elves were faster, stronger, and wielded magic that defied explanation. But they bled, and tonight they would bleed again. As Solomon crouched in the shadows of the elven fortress, watching the patrols pass, a ghost from his past surfaced in his mind. Her face, soft yet strong, flooded his thoughts. He had once loved her, long ago, before life had pulled them apart. They had made different choices, walked different paths, but the bond had never truly broken. And now, her daughter was here, trapped in a cold, alien prison. He could still remember the tremor in his old friend's voice when they last spoke, the worry she tried to hide but couldn't. He owed her this, not as a soldier, not as a mercenary, but as a man who once dreamed of a life beyond war. If he failed tonight, it wouldn't just be a mission lost. It would be breaking the only promise that still mattered to him. Infiltration. Slipping through the outer perimeter had been easier than expected. The elves relied heavily on magical detection, but Solomon knew their weaknesses. The priestesses who maintained the magical barriers were powerful, but they had to chant continuously, and their focus could be broken. Solomon had used a remote drone to detonate a small charge near one of their watchtowers. The explosion was insignificant, but the disruption in the energy field created a small opening. He slipped through. Inside, elven patrols moved with disciplined precision. Their armor was lightweight yet strong, their weapons elegant but deadly. Unlike humans, they did not rely on radios or spoken commands. Telepathic links between squads made their coordination near perfect. Solomon had studied them, learned their movements, and knew when to strike. A lone elven warrior passed by, golden hair flowing behind her. Solomon moved like a shadow, his knife flashing as he slit her throat before she could react. He dragged the body into the darkness and moved forward. The prisoner. His objective was in the lower levels. A captured scientist, one of the last survivors of the McMurdo research team. She had been taken alive when the elves overran the base, and intelligence suggested she was being held for interrogation. Solomon wasn't here for glory. He was here to bring her back. As he descended deeper into the fortress, the temperature dropped. Ice-coated stone corridors twisted ahead of him, lit by eerie blue torches fueled by elven magic. He moved cautiously, his silenced pistol eliminating the occasional guard. At last, he found her. The cell was carved into the ice itself, thick bars reinforced with a magical barrier. The woman inside was barely conscious, her lab coat torn, her face pale. Solomon could see frostbite on her fingers. She had been left in the cold for too long. He pulled a small device from his pack, a prototype energy disruptor. Holding it against the magical barrier, he activated it. Sparks flickered, and the energy field shattered. He forced the bars open and stepped inside. She stirred, weakly lifting her head. "Who?" "Solomon Kane, a friend of your mother," he said, kneeling beside her. "No need to worry. I'm getting you out of here." She tried to stand but collapsed. He caught her, lifting her onto his back in a practiced motion. She was light, too light. They had barely kept her alive. Escape and pursuit. The alarm came moments later. A psychic surge swept through the fortress as elven sentries realized something was wrong. Solomon cursed, adjusting his grip on the scientist. He moved fast, his years of training pushing his body to its limits. Footsteps echoed down the corridors. He ducked into the shadows as two high elven warriors rushed past, their golden armor gleaming. They carried long, slender swords that pulsed with light. "There!" a voice rang out in Elvish. Solomon opened fire. His rifle suppressor kept the shots quiet, but the elves reacted instantly, dodging with unnatural speed. He rolled, firing 3 more rounds. One of them connected, dropping an elf. The other charged. A fireball erupted from the warrior's palm, racing towards Solomon. He dove behind an ice pillar as the explosion sent shards flying. The scientist groaned in pain, but he had no time to check on her. He fired again, striking the elf in the throat. They kept moving. Solomon used every trick in the book, stun grenades, flashbangs, even setting off small explosives to collapse tunnels behind him. But the elves were relentless. The final stretch. They reached the surface, but Solomon's heart sank. The fortress courtyard was crawling with warriors. He had hoped to slip out unnoticed, but the entire base was on alert. "Hold on," he muttered. He spotted an old maintenance tunnel that led to the coast. It would be a gamble. The elf had likely blocked all main exits, but it was his only chance. He sprinted toward it, bullets and magical projectiles whizzing past him. A blast of ice magic struck his shoulder, sending a wave of frost through his body. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to move. The scientist groaned, barely clinging to consciousness. They burst through the tunnel exit, the frozen coastline stretching before them. Solomon's hidden extraction ship, a small stealth craft he had concealed beneath the ice, was just ahead. But the elves were right behind them. Elven Fortress. Inside the fortress command room, Mary watched the escape unfold. Her expression was unreadable, her cold silver eyes tracking Solomon's every movement. A high elf commander stepped forward. "Shall we pursue, Lady Mary?" Mary, due to her success in taking over Antarctica, was awarded the position of commander of the elven forces on Earth, making her superior to the high elves she used to serve before. Now she only answers to the Queen Alara. Mary, looking to the now meek high elf commander, shook her head. "No." The elves in the room exchanged glances. But Mary turned to them, her gaze sharp. "He has already won this time. Sending more forces against a warrior brave and crafty as that one would be fruitless. Magical as he may be, but he sure took us with a surprise. But we know he exists now." She turned back to the screen, watching as Solomon's ship disappeared into the stormy horizon. "Something tells me he will be back again, and we will be ready for him next time." Her fingers tightened around the hilt of her sword. The war was only beginning. The sea was a churning abyss of black water and white-capped waves, the storm lashing against the metal hull of Solomon Kane's vessel. Wind howled through the rigging, rain hammering against the deck like bullets. The injured young scientist lay unconscious in the small cabin below, her breathing shallow but steady. She had barely survived the harrowing escape from the elven fortress, and now Solomon was faced with another enemy, one far less mystical but just as dangerous. Through the storm's veil, dark shapes emerged, swift and deadly. The Black Sun mercenaries. They hadn't stepped foot in Antarctica, but they had been waiting in ambush for any survivors attempting to flee. Their plan was simple: loot, kill, and leave no witnesses. The mercenaries operated outside any law, and their leader, a ruthless man known only as Voss, had no intention of letting Solomon escape unscathed. A crackling voice came through Solomon's radio, barely audible over the storm. "Solomon Kane, you're carrying something valuable. Drop your weapons, power down your ship, and we might let you live." Solomon's grip on the controls tightened. "Yeah? And what if I don't?" A streak of red light cut through the darkness, a tracer round from a mounted machine gun. The warning shot was clear. Solomon swore under his breath. He didn't have the firepower for a prolonged fight, not against a well-armed mercenary crew. But he had the storm on his side. He yanked the wheel, turning his vessel hard to port just as the first real shots rang out. Bullets slammed into the metal plating, sparks flying. Solomon grabbed his modified assault rifle, rushing to the deck. Rain pelted his face, but he kept his aim steady as he returned fire. A mercenary tried to board his ship, leaping from smaller attack craft. Solomon caught him midair with a burst of gunfire, sending him tumbling into the raging sea. Another enemy tried to flank from the side, but Solomon hurled a grenade into their boat, the explosion rocking the water. The mercenaries, however, were relentless. Their ship was larger, better armed. Solomon could hear Voss barking orders. "Keep him pinned. He's got nowhere to run." Then disaster. A deafening metallic groan echoed from below deck. The ship lurched violently. The engine had failed. Solomon staggered, catching himself on the railing. He looked toward the helm, but it was too late to restart the system. The mercenaries closed in, their boats circling like vultures. But then the storm decided for them. A monstrous wave rose from the depths, slamming into all vessels. Solomon's ship was flung forward, while the mercenaries' boats scattered. Voss's curses were lost to the wind. The storm was no ally. It was simply chaos, and chaos took no sides. Through the sheets of rain, Solomon saw distant lights. The naval blockade. A chance. A narrow escape. The storm threw Solomon's ship straight into the blockade's patrol zone. Flashing searchlights illuminated the battered vessel, and within seconds, warning sirens blared. Navy personnel shouted over megaphones, ordering Solomon to identify himself. Stumbling into the radio room, he managed to grab the mic. "This is Solomon Kane. I have a survivor. Repeat, I have a survivor. Request immediate medical aid." The silence was brief before a response came. "Acknowledged. Maintain course. Do not deviate." Minutes later, a large Navy vessel pulled alongside. Armed soldiers stormed his deck, ordering him to stand down. Solomon didn't resist. He knew the protocol. The young scientist was carried away on a stretcher, medics swarming around her. She was alive, but barely. As for Solomon, he was taken into custody. Reunion in chains. Solomon sat in a solitary holding cell, stripped of his weapons, his wrists bound. The ship's interior was cold, clinical. He knew how this worked: debriefing, interrogation, clearance procedures. He'd been in situations like this before. But what he wasn't prepared for was the man who stepped through the door. David Lancaster. Tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and tired eyes, David was a man burdened by duty. But right now, his expression was one of personal turmoil. Solomon exhaled. "David." David clenched his fists. "She's my daughter." There it was. The weight of everything. "I know," Solomon said quietly. A long silence. Then, "Why did you risk it?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Solomon looked down, then back up, eyes steely. "Because I owed you. I owed her. I wasn't going to let her die." David's jaw tightened. "I should hate you." Solomon met his gaze. "Then hate me." Another silence, before David turned away. "They'll decide what to do with you soon." And then he left. Solomon leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. At least she was safe. After leaving Solomon's cell, David walked down the silent corridor to his secure communications room. He took a deep breath before initiating the encrypted video call. The screen flickered to life, revealing a woman with weary eyes and tear-streaked cheeks. Her face was pale, her fingers clenched together anxiously. "David, please tell me." He exhaled slowly. "She's safe." The relief was immediate. Her shoulders sagged, and she covered her mouth, a choked sob escaping. Tears welled in her eyes, not of grief, but of gratitude. For the first time in hours, the horror in her expression softened. But then, her gaze sharpened. "And Solomon?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. David hesitated. Then, after a pause, he simply said, "Alive, and where he belongs." Before she could ask more, he ended the call. The screen went black, leaving only David's own reflected face staring back at him, etched with emotions too complicated to name. He ran a hand down his face, exhaling heavily. Then, without another word, he turned and left the room. Meanwhile, in Antarctica, the wreckage of Black Sun mercenaries' attack boats washed up on the frozen shore. The survivors, battered and disarmed, crawled from the wreckage, only to find themselves surrounded by elves. High elf warriors, clad in elegant yet lethal armor, raised their glowing spears. One of them sneered. "Humans, filthy scavengers." The mercenaries threw down their weapons, their leader Voss raising his hands. "We surrender," he called out. A blonde-haired high elf commander scoffed, raising her hand. "Kill them." The mercenaries panicked, backing away, but they were outmatched. Elven archers took aim. But then, "Hold!" The voice cut through the cold like a blade, and the elves immediately obeyed. Mary stepped forward, clad in her dark armor, her golden hair barely swayed in the freezing wind. Her violet eyes, devoid of warmth, studied the pathetic humans before her. The high elf commander turned, confused. "Commander Mary, these worms." Mary raised a hand, silencing her. "Take them to the fortress. They may still be useful." The elves hesitated, but no one dared question her command. The mercenaries were rounded up, their fates unknown. Mary watched impassively, then turned her gaze to the ocean, the direction where Solomon had fled. Her eyes narrowed. The dungeon of the fallen. The screams of the mercenaries echoed through the dark stone halls beneath the elven fortress. Torches flickered, casting eerie shadows on the cold walls, their flames unnaturally dim under the influence of the lunar priestess's divine magic. The air was thick with the scent of iron, sweat, and despair. Mary stood at the edge of the chamber, her golden hair gleaming under the pale blue light of the lunar priestesses, her expression a perfect mask of indifference. Bound and stripped of their weapons, the captured Black Sun mercenaries writhed in agony as elven interrogators worked their craft. High elves, their golden blonde hair marking their noble status, observed with folded arms, eyes filled with disdain. "Pathetic creatures," one of the high elf knights muttered. "They break so easily." A lunar priestess, clad in flowing silver robes, placed a delicate hand over the forehead of a bound mercenary, her eyes glowing with divine radiance. The man convulsed as his memories were forcefully unraveled by soul search, a divine magic technique feared by even the strongest of minds. "He speaks the truth," the priestess announced. They had no loyalty to humans, elves, or even their own members. They came here only to scavenge from those who fought and died. Scoffs and sneers rippled through the gathered Sun Knights and High Elves. "This is what the humans call mercenaries." A Sun Knight spat on the ground. "No honor, no pride, just rats scurrying for gold." A bound mercenary, his face bruised and swollen, lifted his head with a weak chuckle. "Honor doesn't fill your stomach, knife ears." His defiance was cut short as a boot slammed into his ribs, sending him sprawling. Mary paid little attention to the violence. Her focus was on one man, Voss, the leader of the Black Sun mercenaries. Voss was trembling, not from pain, not from the injuries, but from her gaze. Mary's amber eyes held the promise of something beyond mere death. A fanatic's madness, the kind of unwavering conviction that could not be bought, reasoned with, or escaped from. She tossed something at his feet, a small, still image captured through magic. Solomon Kane, guiding the injured young female scientist onto his ship as he fled Antarctica. "Tell me everything you know about him," Mary said softly. Voss swallowed. His instincts screamed at him to lie, but something in Mary's presence told him that deception would not end in mere death. So he talked. The legend of Solomon Kane. Voss recounted everything he'd heard about Solomon Kane, a name that drifted like a ghost in a mercenary world. A man who never lost a target, whether it was a high-profile assassination, a dangerous retrieval mission, or a corporate war fought in the shadows. A man who once single-handedly wiped out a cartel's entire leadership in a single night, leaving nothing but whispers and fear in his wake. A man who, according to rumors, had escaped a war-torn country while being hunted by an elite military force, outsmarting them at every turn. And now, he had come to Antarctica to rescue a girl. Voss finished speaking, his voice hoarse. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Mary studied the image again. A strange emotion flickered through her mind, gone before she could grasp it. "Interesting," she murmured. Voss exhaled, relieved that he was still breathing. But then, Mary smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips. And Voss realized, with absolute certainty, that he would have preferred death. The meeting of the past and present. Far from the elven fortress, Solomon Kane sat in his cell aboard the Navy vessel. He was unshackled, but his movements were closely watched. The door creaked open, and David entered. Without a word, he gestured for Solomon to follow. Through the corridors, past saluting officers and whispered conversations, they arrived at the medical bay. Inside, the young female scientist, David's daughter, sat upright on the bed, her wounds bandaged. Her eyes widened as Solomon stepped in. You're the one who saved me," she said, voice still weak. Solomon gave a simple nod. David, standing behind him, crossed his arms. "She insisted on meeting you." The girl reached out a trembling hand. "Thank you." Solomon glanced at David, whose face remained unreadable. Then he shook the girl's hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Rest," he said simply. The girl smiled. "You're not as scary as they say." David chuckled. "That's because he's still handcuffed." Solomon smirked. "For now." As he turned to leave, David's voice stopped him. "I never thank you," David said. His expression softened, just for a moment. "For saving my daughter." Solomon met his gaze. "You're welcome." Then the door closed behind him, leaving father and daughter alone. And David, staring at his reflection in the dark screen of the monitor, felt the weight of unspoken words pressing against his chest. As Solomon turned to leave, the young scientist found herself staring at his broad back, a strange tightness forming in her chest. All her life, she had longed for the warmth of a father's presence, someone who would protect her, guide her, and simply be there. But her father, David, the ever-dedicated naval officer, had always been absent, duty-bound to the ocean rather than his family. Her childhood had been filled with long silences, cold dinners, and a quiet tension between her parents, where love felt more like an obligation than something freely given. And then came Solomon, strong, unwavering, fearless. He had carried her to safety, shielded her from death, and now stood before her, shackled like a captured beast. Something stirred inside her, a fluttering warmth she couldn't quite name. Was it admiration, gratitude, or something deeper? Her cheeks warmed at the thought. Did she have a crush on him? The idea unsettled her, yet it seemed to make sense. He had saved her, fought for her, risked everything for her. He was everything she had never found her father. But even as the thought settled in her mind, she didn't realize the truth, that what she mistook for romantic feelings was simply the aching void of fatherly love she had never received. And now, the man who had risked his life for her was in chains. He had saved her, but who would save him? Her fingers clenched the bedsheet. She had spent her life watching others make decisions for her. Not this time. She had to do something. The crossroads of strategy. Inside the fortress atop McMurdo Station, the Elven commanders gathered in tense discussion. The recent interrogation of the Black Sun mercenaries' leader, Voss, had given them more than just information about their immediate enemy. It had revealed the nature of humanity itself. An apex predator, murmured one of the lunar priestesses. Ruthless, adaptable, relentless. We underestimated them, admitted a high elf noble, his golden hair catching the glow of the magical war table. Their war machines, their strategies. This is no primitive species we face. The discovery of a massive naval blockade encircling Antarctica only deepened the crisis. We have two choices, said a high elf commander. 1. We inform Queen Alara of our predicament and request reinforcements. This will ensure a breakthrough, but will lower our standing in the Queen's eyes. A murmur of agreement passed among the high elves. But there is another way, said Mary, stepping forward. The golden-haired Sun Knight radiated an aura of unwavering determination. Instead of overwhelming them with numbers, we will break through the blockade at a single point with speed and precision. The room fell silent. Impossible, scoffed a high elf noble. Their fleet is too vast. Even if we break through, the others will close in before we escape. Mary's emerald eyes gleamed with confidence. Not if we move before they can react. Not if we strike where they least expect. Her plan was simple but bold. Identify a weak link in the blockade and exploit it with overwhelming force before reinforcements could respond. The High Elves hesitated. Relying solely on a small, elite force rather than sheer numbers was an insult to their military doctrine. This is reckless, one of them muttered. And requesting reinforcements is weak, Mary shot back. A tense silence followed. Finally, Mary invoked her authority as commander of the Royal Knights. Her decision was final. Yet that night, a secret message was sent to Queen Alara by dissatisfied high elf nobles, informing her of the situation. They believed Mary would fail, and that only reinforcements could save them. Tracking Solomon. While the elven commanders debated strategy, others worked in the shadows. Voss, the leader of the Black Sun mercenaries, had provided more than just vague details during his interrogation. Under the influence of elven magic, he revealed key intelligence. Solomon Kane had escaped with the young scientist. They were on a ship heading toward the blockade. But even Voss didn't know the exact ship. That was where the wind magic adepts came in. Elven mages attuned to air currents scoured the skies with their magic, tracking unnatural disturbances caused by human vessels. Through this combination of human treachery and elven sorcery, Mary and her Royal Knights identified a likely target, a lone U.S. Navy vessel, positioned farthest from the main fleet. It was a resupply ship carrying wounded personnel. Vulnerable, isolated, a perfect weak link. Mary chose this ship for a reason. It was valuable, yet distant enough that reinforcements would not arrive in time. They needed to capture the young scientist alive, but they did not yet know that David was on board. The attack begins. The U.S. Navy resupply ship drifted silently in the frozen waters of the Southern Ocean. Inside, Solomon Kane sat in his confined cell, wrists bound in reinforced cuffs. Nearby, in the ship's medical bay, David sat in the dimly lit medical bay, watching over his daughter as she recovered. She stirred in her sleep, murmuring something. David reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. A pang of guilt stabbed through his chest. "You're safe now," he whispered. But safety was an illusion. Then the attack came. The first blast of lunar magic severed the ship's communications. The second disabled its engines. Alarms blared. Soldiers scrambled. But the elves were already upon them. From the dark sky, Mary and her Royal Knights descended like golden comets, their enchanted blades flashing in the moonlight. They cut through the human defenders with brutal efficiency. This was not a battle. This was a slaughter. Inside his cell, Solomon Kane felt the ship tremble. He knew. They were coming. The door burst open, but it wasn't an elf. It was David. He stood there, pistol in hand, his expression grim. "You're a pain in the ass, Kane," he muttered. "But right now, I need every good fighter I can get." Solomon flexed his wrists as the cuffs fell away. "Took you long enough." The two men raced through the corridors. They had one goal: reach the young scientist before the elves did. But they were too late. The confrontation, When Solomon and David reached the medical bay, Mary was already there. She stood over the young scientist's bed, her golden hair shimmering in the emergency lights, her sun knight armor radiant despite the chaos. Around her, the royal knights formed a disciplined formation, weapons drawn. The young scientist's eyes fluttered open. She saw Mary. She saw her father. She saw Solomon Kane. And in that moment, she understood. They had come for her. David's hands tightened into fists. You? Mary turned her gaze on Solomon. The man who had humiliated the elves, infiltrated their fortress, and escaped alive. She did not see a broken prisoner. She saw a warrior. Interesting, she murmured. You're more persistent than I expected. Solomon's hand hovered near his belt, where his confiscated weapons should have been. And you're more stubborn than I expected. Mary's lips curved slightly. I take that as a compliment. The ship shuddered violently. The human fleet had noticed the attack. Reinforcements were on the way. Mary turned to the young scientist. You are coming with me. The young scientist clutched her father's arm. David stepped forward. Like hell she is. A flicker of something, respect, passed through Mary's eyes. You are brave, she said softly. But bravery does not stop fate. She raised her hand. A surge of golden light radiated from her palm. And then the ship exploded. The escape. Smoke and fire engulfed the corridors. The force of the blast sent Solomon and David crashing against the walls. Through the chaos, Solomon caught a final glimpse of Mary and the royal knights, vanishing into the darkness, dragging the young scientist with them. Solomon roared in frustration. David screamed his daughter's name, but it was too late. As the elves retreated into the night, the battle was over. The young scientist was gone. And for Solomon Kane, the war had just become personal. The USS Theodore Roosevelt, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, loomed over the turbulent waters of the South Atlantic as its crew scrambled into action. Reports had already been sent to Washington, London, and other major capitals. The elves had broken through the Antarctic naval blockade with sheer speed, and now the chase was on. David stood on the deck of the USS Winston S. Churchill, a guided missile destroyer, gripping the cold metal railing as he listened to the latest updates over the radio. His face was tense, unreadable. Multiple fighter jets are in pursuit of unidentified hostiles heading towards South Georgia Islands. Naval Command orders all blockade ships to maintain positions. No pursuit authorization at this time. David clenched his jaw. Orders. Always orders. His daughter was in enemy hands, and he was stuck here, obeying command from higher-ups who knew nothing of the pain clawing at his chest. But even if he wanted to disobey, he couldn't. South Georgia was too far for ships to catch up, and breaking formation would risk the integrity of the blockade. Then there was Solomon Kane, standing beside him, arms crossed, eerily calm. "Let me go," Solomon said. David turned to face him. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Solomon smirked. "You and I both know that if your daughter is alive, she's being taken for a reason. The elves don't take prisoners randomly. That means she's either valuable or they think she is. Either way, I'm getting her back." David hesitated, his duty clashing with his instincts as a father. Solomon continued. "You can't move without orders, but I can." A long silence followed. Then David sighed. "I can't officially authorize anything," he said, his voice low. "But I might be able to get you out of here." Solomon nodded. That was all he needed to hear. The sad reunion. Before Solomon left, David took him to a secure communication room aboard the USS Winston S. Churchill. A single screen glowed in the dimly lit room, waiting to establish a connection. David exhaled sharply before initiating the call. The screen flickered, and within seconds his wife's face appeared, a woman with sharp yet tired features, her auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail. But the moment she saw Solomon, her expression froze. A complicated mix of emotions flickered across her face. Shock, relief, anger, and something else, something unspoken, buried beneath years of separation. "Solomon," she breathed, almost as if she couldn't believe he was real. Solomon, however, remained composed. "You don't need to thank me," he said evenly. Jamie still needs saving. David's wife swallowed, her voice unsteady. Saving? But wasn't she saved? David, what in God's name is going on here? At least tell me, my baby is still alive. David stepped in. Yes, the elves took her. We don't know why, but we have a team going in to bring her back. Solomon is leading the ground mission. A brief silence filled the space. Then, her hands clenched into fists. Damn it, David. You said the blockade would keep them contained. How the hell did they take my daughter? David rubbed his forehead, frustration evident in his eyes. I know, all right. We underestimated them. But screaming at me won't change what's happened. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down, though her eyes never left Solomon. You promise you'll bring her back? Solomon met her gaze. There was no hesitation in his answer. I will. For a moment, she said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. David sighed. I'll keep you updated. Stay safe. With that, he ended the call. The screen went black, leaving only David's reflection staring back at him. His face was unreadable, but as he turned to Solomon, his expression hardened. You'd better keep that promise. Solomon adjusted the strap of his gear and gave a small, knowing smirk. You know I will. The drop. Within an hour, David had pulled every string he could. Officially, Solomon Kane had been transferred off the USS Winston S. Churchill. Unofficially, he had been given a new identity as a private mercenary contracted by the U.S. Navy. With a falsified ID and paperwork, Solomon boarded a small transport plane bound for Presidente Carlos Ibáñez del Campo International Airport in Chile. From there, the plan was simple. He would join a coalition of elite troops who were being assembled for a high-risk mission, an airborne insertion on a South Georgia island. The world's governments weren't taking chances. If the elves had taken Jamie, David's daughter, then she was valuable. More valuable than they had initially thought. As the plane roared over the South Atlantic, Solomon settled into his seat, checking his equipment. His gear was standard for a high-altitude drop, parachute, tactical rifle, sidearm, and enough ammunition for a sustained firefight. The mercenaries and Special Forces soldiers around him were a mix of British Royal Marines, U.S. Navy SEALs, and private contractors. The tension in the air was thick. Some were here for duty, some for money, and others for revenge. Then, a familiar voice cut through the tense atmosphere. Well, if it isn't the legendary Solomon Kane. Solomon turned his head and smirked. Captain Michael Mike Hensley, a Royal Marines officer and an old friend, sat a few seats away. Mike, Solomon said, didn't expect to see you here. Yeah, well, when your bosses hear that aliens are kidnapping people, they tend to send in the best, Mike said, strapping in. And what about you? I thought you retired from all this madness. Solomon shrugged. Let's just say I had a change of plans. Mike narrowed his eyes. This isn't just another job for you, is it? Solomon didn't answer. He didn't need to. Mike sighed, shaking his head. Still the same reckless bastard, I see. A voice crackled through the radio. Approaching drop zone. All units prepare for deployment. Solomon tightened the straps of his gear as the rear ramp of the aircraft opened. Below them, the icy landscape of South Georgia Island stretched out, dotted with mountains and jagged coastlines. The North Sea Task Force had already positioned ships around the island, and aerial reconnaissance had detected strange magical energy signatures near the old Grytviken whaling station. That was their target. The green light flashed. Go, go, go. Solomon and the others jumped. The cold air hit him like a hammer as he plummeted toward the island below, the world blurring around him. The hunt had begun. The cold winds of South Georgia Island howled as the airborne troops descended into the snow-covered landscape. Solomon Kane, gripping the handle of his rifle, landed smoothly amidst the swirling gusts, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The mission was clear: track down the elves who had taken Jamie before they could vanish again. As soon as their boots hit the ground, the soldiers moved in formation. The Royal Marines, the U.S. Special Forces, and the contracted mercenaries, including Solomon under his false identity, were the only ground forces in the operation. Overhead, jets and helicopters patrolled, ensuring no escape from the island. Their intelligence had pinpointed a hidden elven outpost in a valley surrounded by jagged cliffs and dense ice formations. It was there that they believed Jamie was being held. The elves had managed to slip away from Antarctica, but here they were trapped. At least, that was what the commanders believed. First contact with the elves. As the soldiers advanced, the first signs of enemy presence became clear. Tracks in the snow, abandoned supplies, and magical energy remnants. Subtle distortions in the air that made the hairs on Solomon's neck stand on end. Then came the first attack. Bright golden lances of light magic erupted from the cliffs above, forcing the soldiers to take cover. The Royal Knights, elite elven warriors handpicked by Mary, had set up an ambush. Their armor, enchanted to withstand bullets, gleamed under the pale sun as they leaped down from the rocks, their swords cutting through the air like beams of light. "Contact! Contact!" a marine shouted as gunfire erupted. The elves moved like specters, their agility unmatched. Bullets struck but failed to bring them down unless perfectly aimed at the gaps in their armor. Meanwhile, the elves' own magic attacks seared through the air, melting ice and forcing humans to reposition constantly. Solomon, moving on pure instinct, dashed from cover to cover, his modified assault rifle spitting out controlled bursts at the advancing elves. He wasn't here for an all-out battle. He needed to find Jamie. The breakthrough. The battle raged for almost half an hour as the human forces pushed forward, inch by inch, forcing the Royal Knights into retreat. Explosions from grenades and magic blasts turned the battlefield into a scarred wasteland. Finally, they breached the elven outpost, a hastily built underground chamber hidden beneath a rocky overhang. Solomon was the first to descend into the dimly lit tunnels, his boots splashing against melting ice. The others followed closely, weapons raised. What they found made his heart sink. Jamie was gone. The holding cells were empty, and the magical traces suggested that a portal had been used just minutes ago. Mary and her royal knights had escaped, taking Jamie with them. Damn it! Solomon slammed a fist against the cold wall. They had been too late. Then, a new transmission crackled over the radio. "Commander, we've detected magical fluctuations in the Amazon rainforest. The elves have somehow bypassed the entire blockade. They're in South America." Solomon exhaled sharply. Mary and her forces had done the impossible. They had escaped an entire siege and crossed an ocean in the blink of an eye. But he wasn't giving up. "Not now. Give me a ride," he said. "I'm going after them." Inside the dimly lit underground chamber, Jamie sat bound, her mind racing as she struggled against the cold metal restraints. Across from her, Mary stood, her golden hair illuminated by the soft glow of lunar priestesses who were weaving magic into the very air. Mary's piercing amber eyes locked onto Jamie's, her expression unreadable. "You don't even realize it, do you?" Mary said softly, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and cold calculation. "Your reaction to lunar magic is unnatural, for a human, at least. When we use it on you, your body didn't reject it, it harmonized." Jamie's breath hitched, confusion and fear mingling in her chest. Mary knelt beside her, brushing a strand of Jamie's hair aside. "That's why you're still alive. If your body had resisted, like the others, you would have died when we crossed from Antarctica." She stood, arms crossed. "But because you acted as an anchor in space-time, the portal stabilized." Jamie's eyes widened. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was the key to something much bigger. Mary's gaze darkened. "You could be the breakthrough for a permanent portal to Earth. A way for us to come and go as we please." She leaned in, her voice low and sharp. "Cooperate, or you'll find out what happens when you resist." Jamie clenched her fists, refusing to look away. Despite the fear clawing at her throat, one thought burned in her mind. Solomon will come for me. A sudden burst of human gunfire echoed from outside, and an elven scout rushed in. "Commander, the humans are closing in." Mary frowned, but didn't hesitate. She turned to the lunar priestesses, their silver hair gleaming as they stood in a circle, chanting in unison. "Open the portal." Use her to stabilize it. The air vibrated, and within seconds, a shimmering tear in reality formed, revealing a dark, humid jungle beyond. Jamie felt her body grow heavy, as though something deep within her was being pulled into the portal. No, I don't want to go. As Mary's royal knights grabbed her, forcing her through, Jamie's heart screamed for one person. Solomon, save me again. As Solomon stepped onto the warship's deck, David was already waiting. Before Solomon could speak, David's fist crashed into his jaw, sending him staggering back. The surrounding soldiers tensed, but Solomon only chuckled, rubbing his sore jaw. I deserve that, he muttered with a wry smile, shaking his head in regret. David's fury didn't fade, but his voice was steady. Beth collapsed. Solomon's smirk vanished. She held it together until the mission failed. David continued, his voice laced with exhaustion. When she heard Jamie was gone, she broke. The doctors say it's exhaustion and stress, but he exhaled sharply. I should be with her, but I can't. Not now. Solomon felt a pang of guilt. He had been so focused on Jamie's rescue, he hadn't thought about how Beth, his former love, Jamie's mother, was enduring this nightmare. David straightened. I'm taking over the operation. This time, we're bringing in Brazilian special forces. They know the Amazon better than anyone. His expression darkened. But we're not the only ones hunting. Solomon raised an eyebrow. The cartels, warlords, and mercenary groups from all over the world have caught wind of the elves, David explained. Some want their magic. Some want revenge. And others? They just want a piece of the action. He exhaled. It's a goddamn race now. Solomon crossed his arms. And we don't know if the elves can teleport again before we reach them. David nodded grimly. Which means we move now, before we lose Jamie forever. The military transport plane landed at a Brazilian army base deep in the Amazon, the dense jungle stretching endlessly beyond the perimeter fences. The humid air, thick with the scent of wet earth and vegetation, clashed against the cold steel of the arriving aircraft. Solomon and David stepped out onto the tarmac, their boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. Waiting for them was Colonel Rodrigo Silva, the commanding officer of the Brazilian Special Forces, a tall, dark-haired man with sharp eyes and a rigid stance. His gaze swept over the arrivals with clear displeasure. You should know, Rodrigo began, speaking in fluent English, that we do not need U.S. soldiers or half-soldiers to navigate the Amazon. His eyes flicked to Solomon, a mercenary with obvious disdain. This is our jungle. My men will find these invaders. You should rest in your cabins until further notice. David's fists clenched at the Brazilian's arrogance, but Solomon stepped forward before the situation could escalate. Of course, Colonel. We'll stay out of your way. He gave a small, amused smile, knowing full well that staying idle wasn't an option. A different approach. Solomon nudged David with his elbow. No point fighting the locals, mate. If they don't want our help, we'll just have to get it elsewhere. David, still fuming, exhaled sharply. And where do you propose we get that? Solomon smirked. From the people who really run the jungle. He made a few calls, pulling strings with old contacts from his mercenary days. Soon enough, they were en route to meet General Esteban Morales, a feared warlord who operated in the Amazon's lawless regions. Morales commanded a force of well-armed guerrillas, known for their brutal tactics and intimate knowledge of the jungle. If anyone could track the elves, it was them. When they arrived at Morales' jungle camp, the warlord was sitting beneath a large canopy, surrounded by his men. His beady eyes flickered with interest as Solomon and David approached. A mercenary and a Navy man. An odd pair, Morales mused in Spanish, rubbing his thick mustache. Why should I trust either of you? Solomon chuckled, stepping forward. You don't have to trust me. Just let me prove I'm worth having around. Morales raised an eyebrow. And how will you do that? Solomon looked around at the group of hardened fighters, then gestured at them. Pick your best man. Morales grinned. Very well. He signaled one of his men, a massive enforcer named Carlos, to step forward. Carlos sneered. You don't look like much, old man. Looks can be deceiving. Solomon cracked his neck. Shall we? Carlos lunged first, aiming to crush Solomon with brute strength, but the veteran mercenary sidestepped with effortless speed. A quick jab to the ribs, a spin to avoid a counter, and then a sharp elbow to the back of Carlo's skull sent him sprawling to the ground. It was over in seconds. Silence filled the camp before Morales burst into laughter. Impressive. I like you, Solomon Kane. Fine, you and your friend can ride with us. David, watching from the sidelines, crossed his arms. You always have to show off, don't you? Solomon shrugged. Gets results, doesn't it? Meanwhile, the elves' hunt begins. The jungle was alive with movement. Branches swayed, the thick foliage rustled, and the distant sounds of the human pursuers echoed through the trees. But the elves were not running blind. They had weapons far beyond the crude steel of men. Jamie stumbled forward, her wrists bound by enchanted ropes. The elves around her moved with eerie silence, their golden armor barely making a sound as they navigated the dense jungle. Ahead of her, Mary, the golden-haired Sun Knight, walked with effortless grace, her eyes scanning the surroundings. Suddenly, Mary raised a hand. The elves stopped. Jamie, panting from exhaustion, lifted her head and saw what had caught their attention. Figures moving through the trees, the first of the human forces tracking them. Mary turned to the lunar priestesses accompanying them. It's time. The priestesses stepped forward, raising their hands toward the canopy above. Their voices hummed in a haunting, melodic chant, their lunar magic seeping into the air. A strange stillness settled over the jungle. Then, one by one, the animals responded. A flock of brightly colored macaws let out shrill cries before diving at the approaching human soldiers, pecking and screeching in a frenzy. Packs of jaguars emerged from the undergrowth, their eyes glazed over with unnatural light as they prowled toward the humans. Even the rivers stirred as caimans slithered into the paths of the advancing troops, ready to attack on command. Jamie gasped, watching in horror as the jungle itself turned against her people. What are you doing?" she demanded. Mary glanced at her, an almost amused expression on her face. "We are merely reminding your people that this world does not belong to them alone." Jamie's blood ran cold as she saw the first soldiers go down, overwhelmed by the hypnotized animals. Some managed to shoot, others tried to retreat, but the elves didn't even need to lift their blades. The jungle fought for them. Mary stepped closer to Jamie, lowering her voice. "Using you as an anchor, our great Queen Alara will bring the mightiest of elven fleets to conquer this world." Jamie struggled against her bindings, her breath quickening. "You're insane." Mary only smiled. "No, child. We are destined." The Sun Knight leaned in, her golden eyes gleaming. "You can make this easier, you know. Queen Alara has no interest in unnecessary bloodshed. Cooperate, and she will ensure your safety and the safety of those you love." Jamie's chest tightened. "You're lying." Mary tilted her head. "Am I? Think of your mother, your father, even that mercenary who keeps throwing himself into danger for you. Would you rather they perish?" Jamie bit her lip, her mind racing. Would Alara really spare them? Or was this just another lie? Before she could answer, a lunar priestess stepped forward. "We have located one of the stable nodes," she announced. "We can prepare the portal." Mary nodded. "Do it." The humans are closing in. The priestesses raised their arms again, their magic swirling into the air. The space before them began to twist and ripple, forming the first threads of a portal. Jamie felt the pull again, that strange sensation deep in her core. It was her. She was the key to this portal. I have to do something, she thought desperately. But before she could even formulate a plan, the magic took hold, and the elves vanished, escaping again like the siege of South Georgia and reappearing deep within the Amazon rainforest. The hunt was far from over. The Amazon rainforest was alive with the hum of nature, chirping insects, rustling leaves, and distant howls of unseen predators. But tonight, something unnatural disrupted its rhythm. A shimmering distortion in the air cracked open near a tribal settlement, sending a gust of wind that disturbed the canopy. From the swirling vortex, Mary and her royal knights emerged, their golden armor reflecting the moonlight, their presence an omen of death. The sudden arrival startled the tribal villagers. The elders shouted commands, and warriors rushed forward with spears and bows, their bodies painted with symbols of protection and war. But they were mere mortals against the elves. Two royal knights stepped forward, unsheathing their enchanted blades, their faces devoid of emotion. The first warrior lunged with a spear. His attack was intercepted by a swift horizontal slash, severing his arm. His scream barely escaped before the second knight drove a blade through his chest. The massacre began. Women and children fled into the jungle, but the elves' archers picked them off with deadly precision. Arrows imbued with light magic burned through flesh, leaving behind charred wounds. Those who tried to fight had their weapons shattered by telekinetic force or were impaled where they stood. Jamie, bound and forced to watch, felt her stomach churn. These elves were not warriors. They were butchers. The scene before her was a vision of Earth's future if the elves conquered it. This would be her mother. This would be David. This would be Solomon. Her fingers clenched into fists. Mary, standing nearby, observed Jamie's changing expression with a knowing smile. "You understand now, don't you?" Her voice was calm, almost soothing. "Your people have no chance against us. This is mercy, a quick death, rather than slow enslavement. If you cooperate, I can ensure your loved ones are spared. The queen does not need to punish those who are obedient." Jamie glared at her. "You call this mercy? You slaughtered innocent people." Mary's golden eyes glowed under the moonlight. "A necessary sacrifice. Their existence was meaningless. They were in our way." She motioned for her knights to continue moving. The stable node was still miles ahead, but soon the portal between Forestia and Earth would be permanent, and no army in the world could stop it. The human pursuit. On the human side, the latest magnetic fluctuations had pinpointed the elves' new location near the tribal settlement. A multinational force of special operations units, mercenaries, and private hunters mobilized toward the coordinates, each with their own goals. Inside the command tent, David adjusted his gear while speaking into his radio. "All teams, be advised. We have confirmed elven presence near native settlement. Proceed with caution. They will not hesitate to wipe out resistance." Solomon, leaning against a Humvee, exhaled smoke from a cigarette. "If they're to settlement, they're going to be bodies." "Hope you're ready for that, Dave." David's jaw tightened, but he gave a nod. He had already steeled himself for the horrors ahead. The first obstacle wasn't the elves themselves, but the jungle itself. The lunar priestesses had used magic to hypnotize the wildlife, turning the rainforest against them. Wildcats pounced from the shadows, crocodiles emerged from swamps to drag men into the depths, and venomous snakes dropped from trees onto unsuspecting soldiers. The closer they got to the coordinates, the more aggressive the wildlife became. Gunfire echoed through the forest as mercenaries and soldiers fought back against their unnatural foes. Solomon, ever the survivor, moved like a shadow through the battlefield, bypassing the worst of the chaos. He knifed a jaguar midair, its body crashing into a soldier behind him. David, a former elite marksman, fired with cold precision, taking out 3 pouncing Maine wolves before they reached his squad. Despite the resistance, Solomon and David's group was the first to reach the settlement, only to be met with horror. A massacre in the moonlight. The village was silent, save for the crackling of flames. Bodies lay strewn across the dirt, some dismembered, others burnt beyond recognition. The stench of death was thick in the air. A child's small, lifeless hand peeked from beneath a collapsed hut. Solomon's grip tightened on his rifle. "Goddamn elves!" David knelt by one of the fallen warriors, his hands trembling slightly as he closed the man's lifeless eyes. We were too late. One of the surviving tribesmen, barely alive, reached for David's boot. His mouth moved, but only blood gurgled out. "What is it? Who did this?" David asked, leaning in. With his last breath, the man rasped a single word. "Son," and then silence. Solomon's gaze lifted to the trees, catching faint traces of elven footprints disappearing deeper into the jungle. He exhaled sharply. "They're still close." David stood, his eyes cold. Then we keep moving. The hunt was not over. Beth awakens. Beth's eyes fluttered open, the beeping of medical monitors filling her ears. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital ward made her squint as she tried to focus. A familiar face sat beside her, gently dabbing a wet cloth against her forehead. Sophia, David's younger sister. "You're awake." Sophia's voice was soft, but relief was evident in her eyes. Beth tried to sit up, but a sharp headache forced her back down. Where's David?" Sophia hesitated, then sighed. "He's in the Amazon." Beth's heart pounded. "The Amazon?" Sophia nodded. After the failed operation, all hell broke loose. The elves used another portal, and now every military, mercenary, and opportunist is chasing them down. David, he's leading the charge. Beth's breath caught. Her husband was out there, fighting God knows what. And she had been unconscious this entire time. She reached for the call button. "I need to see him. Now." Sophia placed a calming hand over hers. "I already tried. We contacted his assigned base, but..." She hesitated, her expression darkening. Beth narrowed her eyes. "But what?" Sophia exhaled. "David left. He and Solomon had a scuffle with the base commander and took off with a group of mercenaries." Beth's stomach twisted. "He's not even with the military anymore? Who told you this?" Sophia glanced at the door, where a man in a military uniform stepped inside, a familiar face. Ryan Carter. Beth blinked in recognition. Ryan had once dined at their home, one of David's old squad mates. Ryan gave her a solemn nod. "Mrs. Lancaster, I came as soon as I heard you woke up. I was at the base when David left. It wasn't pretty. He clashed hard with command, and before anyone could stop him, he was gone. He's deep in the jungle now, chasing the elves with Solomon Kane." Beth gripped the sheets tightly. "Find him." Ryan met her gaze. "We're trying." But Beth knew that out in the jungle, where magic and monsters lurked, time was running out. The thick canopy of the Amazon rainforest concealed many secrets. But tonight, it bore witness to an event unlike any other. The elves had reached their destination, a hidden cave behind a roaring waterfall, one of the predicted stable nodes for their portal magic. Mary stepped forward, her golden hair damp from the mist, as she surveyed the surroundings. Behind her, the lunar priestesses prepared the ritual, carving intricate symbols into the stone floor with glowing lunar energy. Jamie sat at the center, bound by magical restraints, her mind still racing from the massacre she had witnessed. "You've seen what happens when we encounter resistance," Mary said coldly, kneeling before Jamie. "Your cooperation will make this easier for everyone, including your loved ones." Jamie clenched her fists. She had made up her mind. She would never help the elves willingly. Above the waterfall, flickers of strange lights began to materialize, sending waves of energy through the sky. It was subtle, but not subtle enough to escape the ever-watchful eyes of Earth satellites. In mere minutes, every intelligence agency and military force tracking the elves had their sights locked on the new location. The hunt begins. David Lancaster, Solomon Kane, and their warlord allies were the first to receive the satellite intelligence. Without hesitation, they pushed their forces forward, cutting through the jungle like a storm. They weren't the only ones. Multiple factions, from special forces to mercenaries and bounty hunters, were converging on the waterfall, all with different motivations. The elves, knowing they were discovered, mobilized immediately. Mary made a decisive call. Only she and the lunar priestesses would remain inside the cave to ensure the portal anchored successfully. The rest of the royal knights would form a defensive perimeter and delay the incoming forces. As Solomon and David's team reached the outskirts of the waterfall, the battle erupted. The clash at the waterfall. The warlord's men, hardened jungle fighters, fired first. Their bullets tore through the trees, but the royal knights, using light magic, moved faster than any human could react. Blinding flashes illuminated the darkness as elven swordsmen cut through the front lines. David, relying on his sharpshooter instincts, took out 3 royal knights before they even reached him. Solomon, meanwhile, used his agility to weave through the chaos, dispatching elves with quick, precise strikes. The battle was brutal. The elves had superior physical abilities and magic, but the humans had firearms and numbers. Explosions rocked the jungle as grenades tore through elven formations, while enchanted arrows struck down heavily armed soldiers. Solomon and David fought their way to the waterfall's entrance, where they finally came face to face with Mary. The final stand. Mary stood alone at the cave entrance, her golden armor reflecting the moonlight, her sword radiating with holy energy. She was a sun knight, one of the best the elves had to offer. "You are too late," she said as the ground beneath them hummed with arcane energy. "The portal is opening, and your world will fall." David raised his rifle, but Mary was faster. With a single movement, she sliced through the gun's barrel, forcing him back. Solomon lunged forward, knives flashing, but Mary anticipated his attack, countering with a brutal kick to his ribs that sent him crashing against the rocks. David, recovering quickly, grabbed a fallen knife and slashed at Mary's exposed side, drawing blood. She hissed in pain, but instead of anger, she smiled. "You fight well," she admitted, "but it won't be enough." Inside the cave, the lunar priestesses chanted in unison. The portal's energy was stabilizing. The invasion was about to begin. Solomon spat out blood, rising to his feet. His mind raced. He had to stop them. He had to save Jamie. The battle was far from over. A miscalculation. Suddenly, the magical circle flared to life, and a shimmering gateway formed. But something was wrong. Instead of connecting to Forestia, the portal pulsed erratically, redirecting its energy elsewhere. A second temporary portal had been opened, in Antarctica. Far away, at the elven fortress built upon the ruins of McMurdo Station, the remaining high elves watched in satisfaction as the newly formed gateway shimmered inside their stronghold. This was no accident. It was the result of their secret request to the royal court. Queen Alara had sent reinforcements, convinced by high elven nobles that Mary and her royal knights had jeopardized the invasion with reckless decisions. Standing before them, stepping through the glowing threshold, was a figure clad in flowing silver robes, the second royal elf to set foot on Earth after Prince Dayak. Their piercing gaze surveyed the gathered forces, their presence radiating an undeniable air of authority. The war in the Amazon had just taken a new turn, but a far greater battle was about to begin in Antarctica. Back in cave, Mary's eyes widened in shock and fury as the portal stabilized. Not to Forestia, but back to Antarctica. A cold realization struck her as she understood what had happened. The second portal, secretly opened at the elven base in Antarctica, had overridden their connection. The high elf nobles had acted behind her back, bringing in reinforcements and seizing control of the invasion effort. Those cowards! Mary seethed, her fingers tightening around her sword hilt. She turned sharply, storming into the cave to confront the lunar priestess. "Explain this. Why didn't the portal connect to Forestia?" She demanded clarification even after knowing the answers herself. The priestess, kneeling in exhaustion, looked up hesitantly. A second portal was established in Antarctica. It interfered with the connection. Queen Alara's reinforcements have arrived. Before Mary could react further, a sudden gunshot echoed outside. David had fired a round to disrupt the elves, while Solomon rushed forward with blinding speed. Using the momentary distraction, David pushed deeper into the cave, his eyes locked onto Jamie. Without hesitation, he grabbed his daughter, shielding her as Solomon provided cover fire. Mary turned back toward the entrance, her expression darkening as she saw the royal knights struggling against the human forces. Their formation was breaking, and even the strongest among them were showing signs of exhaustion. Gritting her teeth, she made a swift decision. "Fall back," she commanded. "Retreat to Antarctica." Even though the portal had failed to connect to Forestia, this stable node was still of immense strategic value. The lunar priestesses could now use it to create temporary portals from Antarctica to any location within a 100-kilometer radius. This meant they had successfully established a second invasion point on Earth, though they still had to go through Antarctica first. With one last glance at the battlefield, Mary clenched her fists, frustration burning inside her. Then, with complicated thoughts weighing on her mind, she stepped through the portal, disappearing into the icy domain of Antarctica alongside her remaining royal knights. As soon as Mary stepped through the portal, the icy winds of Antarctica greeted her once again. The harsh, unforgiving landscape of Earth's southernmost continent felt colder than ever, but it was nothing compared to the chill she felt as her cold eyes swept across the gathered elves waiting for them. The high elves, adorned in their ceremonial cloaks, stood in rigid formation, their gazes shifting between Mary and the new arrival behind them. They had been eagerly awaiting the reinforcements from Forestia, and after receiving them, they were on the way to go back to the fortress, but the reopening of the portal made them excited on the possibility for more reinforcements, their expressions proud and expectant. However, when the portal suddenly reopened from the Amazon instead of Forestia, their pride turned to confusion, then fear, as Mary emerged with her battered royal knights. The atmosphere tensed further as one of the high elves hesitantly stepped forward. "Commander Mary," he said cautiously, bowing slightly. "We had assumed your forces were." Mary's cold glare cut him off. "You assumed what?" Her voice was sharp, a blade against the ice. The high elf hesitated. He had expected Mary to return a failure, if she returned at all. The high elves had sent a secret message to the royal court in Forestia, declaring Mary unfit for command, an ambitious commoner blinded by her own greed for success. They had requested reinforcements to replace her, and now, standing before them, Mary radiated a barely contained fury that sent a shiver down their spines. "We only sought to ensure the success of our mission," another high elf tried to explain. "Without direct communication, we could not." A voice, smooth and regal, interrupted them. "How disgraceful! Is this how the mighty warriors of the Elven Empire conduct themselves?" A tall figure stepped forward, flanked by an elite escort. Her presence commanded immediate attention, and even Mary felt her muscles tense instinctively. Standing before them, draped in flowing silver and violet robes, was Diana von Forestia, the twin sister of Prince Diog and the second royal elf to step foot on Earth. Mary remained silent, her golden eyes locking onto Diana's silver ones. There was no warmth in that gaze. Diana smirked, as if amused by the situation. "Oh, Mary, how unexpected to see you standing here." Mary's fingers twitched, but she kept her composure. Diana had always been a shadow over Diog's life. She never allowed anyone else to get close to him, treating him as her personal plaything. When Diog had fallen in love with Mary, Diana had been one of their greatest obstacles, ensuring that no one in the royal court would ever approve of their union. She was also one of the reasons Diog had thrown himself so recklessly into battle. Diana studied Mary with an almost condescending amusement. "You seem surprised to see me." Mary's voice was cold. "I had hoped never to." The high elves shifted uncomfortably. The air between the two women crackled with tension, a silent battle of wills. Diana chuckled, tilting her head. "You wound me, Mary. I'm only here because of your failures." Her silver eyes gleamed with false sympathy. "The royal court was deeply troubled by your, let's say, independent decisions." Mary clenched her fists, but before she could respond, Diana's smirk widened. "Don't worry. I have no intention of taking everything from you. I'm sure you'll find a way to be useful." The high elves, emboldened by Diana's presence, straightened. Mary could see it in their eyes, the shifting power dynamics, the subtle but unmistakable fracturing of command. There were now two factions in Antarctica, one led by Diana and the High Elves, favoring strict adherence to royal court policies. They viewed Mary and her royal knights as expendable, tools to be used and discarded. The other, Mary's faction, composed of common elves and lunar priestesses, loyal to her vision of proving that non-royals could rise beyond their stations. Mary took a slow breath, forcing her anger to cool. Diana was a skilled manipulator. She wanted Mary to lash out, to make a mistake. Instead, Mary smiled. A sharp, knowing smile. "We'll see who's truly useful soon enough," she said smoothly. The battle for Earth had just become a battle for control, and Mary had no intention of losing. David gritted his teeth as he pressed a hand against his side, blood seeping through his torn combat gear. Solomon limped beside him, his left arm hanging uselessly, while Jamie, still dazed from the ordeal, clung tightly to David's side. Their destination was the Brazilian military base, a temporary haven before they could arrange transport to the nearest U.S. base. But their path through the dense Amazon was anything but safe. The rustling of leaves and the faint click of safety catches being flipped off made them stop in their tracks. Within moments, they were surrounded, not by elves, but by the very warlord and his men who had first ventured into this mess with them. The warlord, a tall, scarred man draped in jungle fatigues, stepped forward with a smirk, his rifle slung lazily over his shoulder. Well, he drawled, his heavily accented English dripping with amusement. It looks like you boys have been through hell. And yet, somehow, you're still holding on to the prize. His gaze flickered toward Jamie, eyes gleaming with greed. David tightened his grip on his weapon, though he knew they were outgunned. She's not a prize, he spat. She's a survivor. The warlord chuckled. Survivors don't come with a bounty that could buy a kingdom. He gestured, and his men closed in, rifles raised. Hand her over. You two can walk away. Solomon, despite the pain, managed a dark chuckle. You think after all this, we just hand her over to the likes of you? The warlord grinned. I think you don't have a choice. The jungle air grew tense as fingers hovered over triggers. David and Solomon exchanged a glance. They weren't going down without a fight. The tension crackled in the air, every second dragging toward an inevitable life-or-death battle. Fingers hovered over triggers, breath hitched, muscles tensed, until suddenly, a sharp voice erupted from David's satellite phone. Get down, now. The sudden command sent a wave of confusion through both sides, but David and Solomon reacted instantly, instincts honed by years of experience. They grabbed Jamie and dove to the ground without hesitation. A heartbeat later, hell rained down upon them. Gunfire erupted from the jungle, cutting through the warlord's men with ruthless precision. Rounds tore through flesh and foliage, ripping apart the once silent Amazon night. Shouts of panic turned to screams as bodies dropped in rapid succession. David and Solomon, pressed flat against the dirt, exchanged a quick glance. A new force had entered the battlefield, but whether they were saviors or simply another group of opportunists, neither of them knew yet. One thing was certain. The hunt for Jamie had just taken another deadly turn. The intense gunfire finally began to slow, but the chaos of battle still filled the air. General Esteban Morales, the ruthless warlord of the region, barked orders to his men as they took cover behind the thick jungle foliage, returning fire at the unseen enemy. Whoever had ambushed them was highly trained, using superior tactics and positioning to decimate his forces. Carlos, Esteban's best man, saw the opportunity and took it. A veteran killer with reflexes honed through years of warfare, he dashed toward the wounded trio, David, Solomon, and Jamie, who were still lying low after narrowly avoiding the ambush. His sharp eyes scanned their injuries, calculating his next move. The girl's the key to all of this, he thought. If I take her now, I can name my price. With brutal efficiency, he struck Solomon first, delivering a crushing blow to his ribs, forcing a groan of pain from the injured mercenary. David barely had time to react before Carlos's knee smashed into his gut, sending him collapsing to the ground. Jamie, weakened and dazed, didn't stand a chance. Carlos knocked her unconscious with a swift strike to the back of her head, throwing her over his shoulder. The plan had been to take Jamie and retreat toward Esteban's position, but when Carlos glanced back, his eyes flickered with greed. Esteban was being pushed back, his men falling one after another against the relentless ambushers. It was clear the warlord's forces were losing. If I take the girl and run now, I won't have to share the reward with anyone. Carlos turned on his heel and bolted deeper into the jungle, sprinting toward the primitive wilderness with Jamie in tow. The chase begins. Esteban barely had time to register the betrayal. As he saw Carlos vanish into the trees, his expression twisted in rage. He had lost too many men already, and now one of his own had stolen the most valuable target. "Maldito traitor! Fall back!" Esteban roared, ordering his remaining forces to retreat before the unseen enemy overwhelmed them. Meanwhile, David and Solomon fought to get back on their feet. Their injuries screamed in protest, but they pushed through the pain. Jamie was too important to lose. They forced themselves forward, staggering through the jungle as they tracked Carlos's footprints in the damp soil. They moved purely on adrenaline, the sounds of retreating warlord forces fading behind them. But their bodies had taken too much damage. The combination of blood loss, exhaustion, and injuries finally caught up to them. As they stumbled forward, their vision blurred. Their strength failed. The jungle swallowed them whole. They collapsed into a dark swarm of shadows, and everything faded to black. Rogue. Beth sat in the dimly lit hospital room, the steady beeping of the monitors filling the silence. She was still recovering, but the weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on her chest. Sophia sat beside her, her expression tense, as Ryan entered the room, his face unreadable. "There's news," Ryan said, his voice measured, though Beth could see the hesitation in his eyes. David, Solomon, and Jamie successfully escaped the elven grasp, but they've gone MIA in the Amazon rainforest. Beth's breath hitched. "MIA?" she whispered, gripping the sheets. Ryan nodded. "No one knows what happened. Some reports suggest they were captured by elves. Others say rogue forces might have taken them. And there are even whispers that David and Solomon vanished on their own to protect Jamie." But he hesitated before continuing. "The government suspects David may have gone rogue to save his daughter." Beth's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's absurd. He would never." Ryan raised a hand, his expression pained. "I know, Beth, but they've tasked me with monitoring whether David tries to contact you. They're watching closely." Sophia tensed beside her. "They think he abandoned his duty?" Ryan sighed. "Right now, they don't know what to think. But I needed to tell you before they officially come knocking." Beth clenched her fists, her mind racing. David was out there, lost or in danger, and now the government doubted him? No, she refused to believe it. Whatever had happened, she knew one thing for certain. David Lancaster had not abandoned them. Hunter or prey? A large U.S. Air Force C-17 Globemaster III roared as it touched down on the tarmac of the Brazilian military base, its hulking frame kicking up dust in the humid air. The base personnel watched as the rear ramp lowered, revealing a tall, blonde woman in a sharp black tactical suit, stepping out with an air of absolute authority. She was flanked by a team of elite operatives, their cold, professional demeanor immediately setting them apart from regular soldiers. As she approached the base commander, she extended a hand, her icy blue eyes locking onto his. "Agent Victoria Langley, CIA. I'm here to take over the search for Major David Lancaster." Her voice was smooth, yet carried an unmistakable edge of control. The base commander, a rugged man with years of experience, hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking her hand. "The situation is complicated. We're still gathering intel." Victoria gave a practiced smile. "I understand, Commander. But let's be clear, David Lancaster is no longer just an MIA soldier. He's a potential rogue asset." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And I have orders to retrieve Dr. Jamie Lancaster at any cost." As the commander nodded cautiously, Victoria's mind raced. The U.S. government could not afford to fall behind in the race for magical supremacy. The young scientist rescued from the Antarctic waters had already revealed glimpses of what magic could achieve, and Jamie Lancaster, who had spent the most time among the elves, was now the key to unlocking its secrets. The era of conventional warfare was ending. Magic was the future, and if the United States wanted to remain the world's #1 superpower, it needed to control that future. Victoria's expression remained unreadable as she continued discussing strategy with the base commander. But deep down, she had already made up her mind. David Lancaster would not leave this jungle alive. The warning. Beth sat on the couch, her fingers gripping a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The tension in the room was suffocating, pressing down on her like an invisible force. Sophia sat beside her, arms crossed, eyes sharp with barely contained worry. Across from them, Ryan stood with a grim expression, his fingers resting on a folder that neither of them dared to open just yet. "You need to understand," Ryan began, his voice steady but weighted with urgency. "This isn't just a search operation. The CIA isn't looking for David and Jamie to bring them home safely. They see them as obstacles, dangerous assets that need to be controlled." Beth felt her breath hitch. "What are you saying, Ryan?" Ryan exhaled, leaning forward. "From what my sources tell me, the moment Jamie was rescued from the elves, she became a priority target. The U.S. government is determined to control whatever magic knowledge she has, and they're willing to go to extreme lengths to ensure no one else gets to her first." His eyes flickered with something darker. "That includes eliminating any interference, like David." Sophia clenched her fists. "They think David's an obstacle just because he's protecting his daughter?" Ryan nodded. "And now they've deployed her." Beth's stomach twisted. "Who?" "Victoria Langley." The name sent a chill through the room. Beth had heard of Victoria before. Everyone in intelligence circles had, and even though she was just a housewife, even she had her name from David and his friends. A ruthless CIA operative with a reputation for getting the job done at any cost. She commanded an elite force, handpicked for precision strikes and high-value asset retrieval. The kind of team that didn't take prisoners unless absolutely necessary. "If she's leading the hunt, then they're not planning a rescue mission," Ryan continued. "They're treating this as a retrieval or elimination op. And they're not the only ones. Several other factions, mercenaries, rogue intelligence groups, even some foreign agencies, are swarming the jungle, all after Jamie." Beth's grip tightened around the coffee mug. "Then David and Jamie are better off staying missing." Ryan nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I wanted to tell you. If David reaches out to you, don't tell me. Don't tell anyone. The moment he makes contact, he's as good as dead." Silence fell over the room, the weight of his words settling like a suffocating fog. For the first time, Beth felt true fear, not just for David and Jamie, but for what would happen if they were found. The hunt. Victoria Langley stood at the center of the Brazilian military base, her ice-blue eyes scanning the holographic map of the Amazon jungle in front of her. Her elite unit, clad in cutting-edge tactical gear, moved with mechanical efficiency, loading weapons, checking drones, and reviewing satellite feeds. And yet, after days of searching, they had nothing to show for it. "Status update," she commanded. One of her operatives, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "We've engaged hostile forces twice. One was a local cartel trying to get their hands on the girl. The other was an unknown mercenary group. Both were eliminated." Victoria's jaw tightened. "And Lancaster? Still no sign. Either he's dead in the jungle, or he's better at hiding than we expected." Victoria wasn't pleased with that answer. David Lancaster was a skilled soldier, but he wasn't invincible. Eventually, exhaustion, injuries, or sheer bad luck would catch up to him. The problem was, every time they cleared an area, another faction would appear, slowing their progress. They were fighting on multiple fronts, chasing ghosts while vultures circled their prize. And then, finally, a breakthrough. A scout rushed in, saluting sharply. "Ma'am, we've encountered a local militia force. Their leader, General Esteban Morales, has surrendered. He claims to have vital intel on Jamie Lancaster's location." Victoria smirked. "Well, isn't that convenient? Bring him in." The prisoner. General Esteban sat in the makeshift interrogation room, his hands cuffed to a metal chair. He was a grizzled veteran of the jungle, his body covered in scars that told stories of past battles. Despite his situation, he grinned, his teeth stained from years of tobacco and violence. Victoria entered the room, flanked by two operatives. She took a seat across from Esteban, folding her gloved hands on the table. "You surrendered rather quickly," she said, her tone cold. "Most warlords fight to the last breath." Esteban chuckled. "I know when I'm outmatched, lady. Your men? Good soldiers, armed to the teeth. I've got no illusions about how that fight would have ended. Victoria tilted her head. Then let's skip the pleasantries. Where is Jamie Lancaster? Esteban exhaled, his smile fading slightly. One of my men, Carlos, took her, ran off into the jungle with her over his shoulder. That was the last I saw of either of them. Victoria's eyes narrowed. And what about David Lancaster? Esteban shook his head. Didn't see him. Maybe he's dead, maybe not. But I can tell you this. His grin returned, eyes glinting with amusement. You're underestimating someone. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Who? Solomon Kane. One of her operatives scoffed. The mercenary? Esteban laughed, shaking his head. See, that's your problem. You military types think because he ain't got a uniform, he's not a threat. But let me tell you something. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with confidence. Solomon Kane is worth 10 of your best men in a jungle like this. He doesn't fight like a soldier. He fights like a ghost. And if he's still breathing, then Carlos, Jamie, and even your entire search party, they're just pieces on his chessboard. Victoria didn't even blink. You give a mercenary too much credit. Esteban smirked. Then you haven't met the right ones. The operative to Victoria's right, impatient with the warlord's arrogance, slammed the butt of his rifle into Esteban's face, sending him sprawling to the ground. Blood dripped from his nose, but the warlord only chuckled, wiping it away. You don't like hearing the truth, huh? He taunted. Victoria sighed, standing up. We'll see just how dangerous your mercenary is. She turned to her men. Get ready to move. If Carlos is still out there, we find him. If Lancaster's alive, we kill him. And if Solomon Kane gets in our way. She smirked. We'll deal with him too. As she left the room, Esteban chuckled again, shaking his head. Good luck, lady. You'll need it. The shadow of Solomon Kane. Far from the chaos of Victoria's search, in the deepest part of the jungle, a lone figure moved through the trees like a ghost. Solomon Kane's breathing was steady, his grip firm on his rifle as he followed a set of barely visible tracks. Carlos thought he had vanished into the jungle with Jamie. But Solomon Kane was already hunting him, and he never lost his prey. Drifting in the mire, Solomon Kane's consciousness flickered like a dying flame. He felt weightless, his body adrift in cold water, surrounded by an eerie silence. The scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation filled his nostrils. Then, awareness struck. He wasn't just floating. He was drifting, his eyes snapped open, taking in the world around him. Murky swamp water stretched in all directions, tangled roots and moss-covered trees looming above. The faintest glimmer of moonlight revealed the slow ripple of movement beneath the surface. Something large was watching him. A pair of glowing yellow eyes surfaced a few feet away. A black caiman. Solomon cursed silently. He had never liked crocodilians. Alligators, crocodiles, caimans, killers unchanged for millions of years. He tolerated Indian gharials, but only because those thin-snout creatures stuck to fish. But this monster could crush him with a single bite. His muscles tensed, his heartbeat steady despite the danger. He knew one thing: panic meant death. The caiman inched closer, water rippling around its massive form. Solomon remained perfectly still, assessing his surroundings. There, hanging vines. A possible escape. One shot. One chance. The caiman lunged. Solomon moved. His hand snatched a vine, and with a desperate heave, he pulled himself up just as those powerful jaws snapped shut where his legs had been. The water beneath exploded in fury as the caiman thrashed, denied its meal. Solomon gritted his teeth, using every ounce of strength to climb the tree. His muscles burned, but he didn't stop until he perched safely on a thick branch. Below, the caiman glared at him, its yellow eyes filled with primal hunger. Solomon exhaled, finally catching his breath. Then, his gaze shifted to the jungle beyond the swamp. Carlos's tracks. Deep, heavy footprints marked the mud. The massive bastard had been here recently. And if Carlos was alive, so was Jamie. No sign of David. Solomon didn't linger. He moved, fast, silent, relentless. The hunt was on. A gathering of power. Far to the south, in the heart of Antarctica, the elven fortress stood as a shimmering bastion of ice and magic. Inside, a battle of words and power unfolded. A grand chamber divided two factions, each seated on opposite sides. On one side sat the conservatives, led by Princess Diana, the twin sister of Diog von Forestia. She commanded the support of the high elves and aristocrats, the ruling elite of the Elven Empire. Opposing her were the reformists, led by Royal Knights Commander Mary, the Queen's chosen champion. She represented the commoner elves and the Royal Knights, who sought to redefine the Empire's hierarchy. Tension crackled in the air. No one had expected civility between Diana and Mary. Their history was steeped in hatred. Diana had always viewed her twin brother Diog as her possession. Not even their mother, Queen Alara, was allowed to grow too close to him. To keep him bound to her, Diana had even arranged for Diog to be engaged to a high elf aristocrat, ensuring he would always remain in her shadow. Mary had been the one exception. She had loved Diog, and Diog, for all his faults, had loved her back. To Diana, Mary was a threat, a rival who had dared to pull Diog away from her influence. Yet, as they sat across from each other now, their hatred was buried beneath cold restraint. Something had changed, because both had seen the same vision, a projection from the lunar church, a mission from the saint of Luna herself, the mortal body of a goddess. Most elves believed goddess Luna resided solely in the astral realm, beyond mortal reach. But the true elite, royal elves, high elves of status, and the lunar priestesses knew the truth. A mortal incarnation of Luna existed in the Elven Empire's capital. She was the saint of the lunar church, veiled in mystery, neither fully divine nor fully mortal. The lunar church remained neutral in politics, existing as a counterbalance to both the royal family and the aristocracy. Yet now the saint had spoken. She had given a mission, and that mission required both factions to unite. But unity came at a price. The lunar church's favor could tip the balance of power in the Elven Empire. If Mary's reformists succeeded, Queen Alara's new order would solidify. If Diana's conservatives triumphed, the high elves and aristocrats would crush the rebellion. This was more than a mission. It was a battle for the soul of the empire. The first exchange, Diana's violet eyes met Mary's unwavering gaze. "You have seen the projection," Diana said, her voice smooth yet sharp. "You understand what is at stake." Mary nodded. "I do." The gathered elves held their breath. No insults, no open hostility. For two women with a bloodstained past, even this cold civility was a shock. Diana leaned back, her expression unreadable. "Then we will see who carries out the saints will better." A small, knowing smirk played on her lips. Mary didn't react. She simply replied, "Yes, we will." The chamber remained silent. Two factions, one mission. But beneath this fragile cooperation, an unspoken war had already begun. Whoever succeeded would shape the future of the Elven Empire. And both Mary and Diana knew it. The chase begins. Back in the South American jungle, Solomon Kane moved swiftly, following Carlos's massive footprints through the tangled undergrowth. The swamp was behind him, but the real danger was ahead. Carlos was not just some brute. He had survived battles that had killed lesser men. And if he had Jamie, he wasn't running. He was waiting. Solomon didn't hesitate. He had already faced elves, mercenaries, the wilderness itself. A rogue, ex-military behemoth wasn't going to stop him now. He would find Jamie, and if Carlos stood in his way, Solomon Kane would finish what was started in Antarctica. The hunt was far from over. Carlos moved swiftly through the dense jungle, his massive frame barely hindered by the tangled undergrowth. Jamie was slung over his shoulder, her body weak but stirring. She let out a faint murmur, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "Mother! Aunt Sophia! David!" Her breath hitched, her consciousness flickering. Then, just before slipping back into darkness, she whispered one last name, Solomon, and then she fell silent once more, her body going limp as unconsciousness claimed her again. Carlos's jaw tightened, the last name uttered by now unconscious girl brought him memories of that legendary mercenary and sacred his soul, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. There was no telling who or what was following them. David's consciousness flickered like a dying bulb, phasing in and out of oblivion. His body felt heavy, his mind sluggish. He registered a distant sound, the faint rustling of fabric, the murmur of voices. A damp, earthy smell mixed with the faint tang of antiseptic filled his nose. Slowly, his eyelids fluttered open. An unfamiliar ceiling loomed above him. A simple, khaki-colored fabric stretched over metal supports. It wasn't a hospital ceiling, nor was it the jungle canopy he last remembered. A tent. He was lying on a thin mattress, his body sore but intact. His fingers twitched against rough fabric, feeling the texture of a worn military cot beneath him. His throat was dry as sandpaper as he rasped. "Where am I?" Then, like a lightning bolt through his skull, memories came rushing back. Carlos, Jamie, the fight. His eyes widened as the final image struck him. Jamie being dragged away, her unconscious form slung over Carlos' massive shoulder. Panic surged through him. He jerked upright. Jamie. The sudden outburst made his head spin, but worse, it alerted whoever was outside. Heavy footsteps approached, boots crunching against the dirt. The tent flap shifted. Shit. David moved fast, rolling off the cot and pressing himself against the side of the tent's entrance. Instinct took over. He patted himself down. No weapons, no gear. He was completely clean. Great. He was unarmed, possibly surrounded, and had no idea whether he was among allies or enemies. David took a slow breath. He had to think. Though he was a marksman by trade, David had once been a Navy SEAL. He had left that life behind at Beth's insistence. She feared for his safety. Jamie, just a child back then, had clung to his leg, begging him not to go on another mission. Her wide, tearful eyes had haunted him for years. So he left, and now look where I am. If he had stayed in the SEALs, would he have been able to protect Jamie better? Would he have seen the threat coming? He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He was at a disadvantage. Though he had trained extensively as a Navy SEAL, he always relied on firearms. Unarmed combat was never his strong suit. That was Solomon's specialty. The thought of his former rival made him grimace. That damn bastard was always better in a fistfight. For the first time in his life, David actually wished Solomon was here. The tent flap moved. David tensed, ready to strike. Then he froze. The person standing there wasn't a threat. It was a woman, her long brown hair tied back in a ponytail, dressed in fatigues. A familiar smirk played on her lips. "Captain Lancaster," she said, arms crossed. "You planning to take down the whole camp with your bare hands?" David blinked. "Rebecca." The medic from his SEAL days grinned. "You finally recognized me. Thought you'd lost more than just your weapons." For a moment, David just stood there, trying to process. Rebecca sighed, stepping forward and punching him lightly in the shoulder. "You idiot. Do you have any idea how pissed off everyone was when you just up and quit?" David barely had time to react before she pulled him into a hug, tight and warm, filled with emotion she was barely holding back. "Damn it, David," she whispered. "You should have told us." Guilt crept into his chest. Back then, he had been too ashamed. Leaving the SEALs wasn't just a career change. It felt like abandoning his brothers and sisters. He had blamed Beth for it, but deep down, he knew the truth. He was scared. Scared of dying. Scared of never seeing Jamie again. And now, Jamie was missing. He pulled back, clearing his throat. "Where am I?" Rebecca smirked. "You're in a forward base. U.S. Navy SEAL territory. And before you ask, yes, we were the third party that crashed your little warlord brawl." David exhaled. "So that's what happened." Rebecca rolled her eyes. "Get out here. There are people who want to see you." Still feeling the weight of his choices, David stepped outside the tent. Stepping outside, he took in his surroundings. Dozens of SEALs moved about the camp, some familiar faces, others new. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just a casual mission. This was something big, and that meant Jamie was still in danger. David's mind raced. If the U.S. military was here, it meant one thing. They were after Jamie, and now he had to decide whether to place his trust on his former comrades and believe the seals would aid him, or hinder his action to protect Jamie. Meanwhile, Solomon's hunt. Perched high among the trees, Solomon Kane lay in wait. His eyes tracked the dim glow of a fire below, where Carlos sat, tending to the flames. Beside him, Jamie lay unconscious. Solomon's grip tightened around the branch. He was in no rush. He had the patience of a predator. Carlos was a mercenary. Mercenaries valued one thing above all: self-preservation. And when backed into a corner, they would do anything to survive, including killing their hostages. That was what Solomon feared most. If Carlos thought there was no way out, he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate Jamie. For now, Solomon watched, waited. One wrong move, and she dies. And that was not an option. Carlos crouched near Jamie, his large hand gripping her shoulder roughly as he shook her awake. "Wake up, princessa," he muttered, his voice low but firm. Jamie groaned, her body weak and mind clouded, barely able to register where she was. But Carlos had no patience. He grabbed a small flask of water, uncapped it, and splashed it on her face. She gasped, her eyes fluttering open in shock. "There we go," Carlos said with a smirk. "Now let's have a little chat. You're valuable, chica, and I need to know just how much before I decide what to do with you." Jamie struggled to focus, her head throbbing. She tried to move, but Carlos's grip tightened. "Come on, sweetheart," he pressed. "You and your friends have made some powerful enemies. Tell me something useful, and maybe I'll think twice before selling you to the highest bidder."